The sky over London is wrong. Where there should be fireworks, there is a skull. Where there should be drifting smoke from late-night trains and river fog, there is a vast, unmoving serpent coiled through a green-lit jaw that hangs directly above the Ministry of Magic like a verdict. The Dark Mark is not a fleeting spell here. It is a permanent constellation, a wound burned into the clouds, casting sickly light over Aurors in regulation black as they sweep the streets below. Muggles feel it before they see it. They shiver on bridges, stare up at the malfunctioning lights above Whitehall, whisper about the strange patrols that never quite appear in photographs. The Statute of Secrecy is fraying at the edges, patched by memory charms and propaganda, but fear has its own language, and it is fluent in both worlds. This is not the London of canon, with a hidden entrance phone box and a ministry humming beneath the surface. This is a capital occupied, watched, and quietly suffocating. High above that poisoned glow, on the rooftop of a forgotten office block, a young man stands with his back to the chimney stack, eyes fixed on the Dark Mark, as if he could will it away. His forehead is smooth, no lightning scar, no visible mark of destiny, and yet Harry Potter holds himself like someone who has spent his entire life braced for impact. His fingers tighten around a contraband wand, the wood half hidden beneath a threadbare sleeve. Every Auror patrol below, a reminder that being caught means Azkaban at best. A soft displacement of air, a shimmer of magic, and another figure slips out from the shadows beside him. Hermione's hair is pinned and darkened, her face altered by a meticulous disillusionment charm, features blurred just enough to pass in a crowd. Up close, though, the tension in her shoulders, the precise way she checks the skyline, the way she leans into Harry's side for just a breath too long, all give her away. Their physical closeness is not an accident. It is armor. It is a promise. What if Voldemort never walked into Godric's Hollow that Halloween night? What if the prophecy Dumbledore heard remained dormant, never sealed by a killing curse, never marking a baby as an equal? Instead of the boy who lived, the wizarding world received something more terrifyingly simple. A Dark Lord, who won the First War, consolidated his ministry, and raised an entire generation, Harry and Hermione included, under his rule. This isn't a story about a hidden savior waiting 11 years for a Hogwarts letter and a giant on a rock. This is a story about two children growing up in a world where Hogwarts is not a sanctuary, but an indoctrination machine, where defense against the dark arts has become authorized practical compliance, where Muggleborns like Hermione are cataloged, surveilled, and re-educated if they ask the wrong questions. In canon, Hogwarts is where friendships blossom into heroism, where childhood mischief becomes a prelude to saving the world. Here, childhood is something stolen. Prefect badges are rewards for ideological purity. House points are weapons. Harry and Hermione's bond forms in the margins, whispered corrections to rewritten history, shared books banned from the library, hands brushing under desks as they pass coded notes about Dumbledore's disappearance, and Snape's unreadable allegiance. Their love, when it finally surfaces, is not a detour from the war. It is the only place the war cannot quite reach. When courage meets brilliance, when trauma meets relentless compassion, when two teenagers realize that the only way to stay human is to hold on to each other, love becomes resistance, refuge, and strategy all at once. Something worth fighting for. On the rooftop, a patrol of black-robed figures sweeps past like shadows on the river. Hermione's breath ghosts against Harry's ear as she whispers, "It has to work this time." He doesn't look away from the Dark Mark. It will, or there won't be a next time. Tonight, we're exploring how this world came to be, how a prophecy that never activated reshaped everything, and how the connection between Harry and Hermione, forged under a permanent Dark Mark, becomes the first spark of a second wizarding war. Rewriting the First War. How Voldemort actually wins. The night Voldemort won doesn't begin with a killing curse. It begins with a choice he doesn't make. What if the prophecy that defined an entire canon saga never actually activates? Trelawney's words are still spoken in that dim room above the Hog's Head. Dumbledore still hears them, but the magic in the prophecy is conditional. It only locks into place when Voldemort chooses a child, and in doing so, marks that child as his equal. No choice, no mark. No mark, no binding fate. So in this timeline, Voldemort does something he almost never does in canon. He hesitates, not out of mercy, but out of cold strategy. We'll examine a Dark Lord who looks at two potential children, at the risk of a direct confrontation with Dumbledore over one family in Godric's Hollow, and decides the prophecy is a trap. Why waste time on a maybe, he thinks, when power is already within reach? While Dumbledore waits for an attack on the Potters that never comes, the real war shifts to the Ministry. Lucius Malfoy's gold, thick with influence, finishes corrupting key departments. Barty Crouch Jr., never exposed, feeds his father's office to the Death Eaters from the inside. Imperious Aurors sign warrants. Laws against subversive organizations are passed in late-night sessions. By the time the Order realizes what's happening, the Ministry isn't a battlefield. It's already lost. And then comes the betrayal that shatters their last illusion of safety. In canon, Peter Pettigrew's treachery leads to Voldemort's first downfall. Here, his betrayal is the final stroke of Voldemort's victory. Wormtail doesn't just give up the Potters. He gives up safe houses, communication lines, the names of unregistered animagi, the exact rotation of Order patrols. One brutal week of coordinated strikes follows. Dorcas Meadows dead in her own kitchen, the Prewett brothers overwhelmed by 10 wands at once, Emmeline Vance vanishing between one breath and the next. Dumbledore tries to rally a second wave, but there is no time. The Wizengamot is purged, trials become performances. Azkaban fills with those who once filled the Great Hall with laughter. This isn't a story about a slow, aesthetic slide into darkness. This is a story about a swift decapitation of resistance before it can adapt. And the Potters? They run, they hide. They are finally cornered, not in Godric's Hollow, but in a safe house they thought untraceable. James duels like he always does, reckless, brilliant, desperate. Lily stands over Harry's crib, wand shaking, whispering a promise that in another world would become ancient magic, but the curse never comes. Instead, Voldemort offers a bargain. 1 life for 2, James Potter's wand, James Potter's allegiance, in exchange for Lily and Harry's survival. Imagine that moment, the boy who once laughed with Sirius in Gryffindor Tower, staring down the man who murdered his friends and being told, quietly, that his love can only protect his family if he damns himself. He says yes. Lily's protection in this world is not a blood ward, it's a compromise that will haunt her. Her love doesn't explode into golden light. It curdles into silence at the dinner table, into the way James can't quite meet Harry's eyes when he comes home in dark robes that are technically Ministry issue. With the Order broken, Voldemort doesn't kill Dumbledore. He cages him. Under a restructured Board of Governors, Dumbledore is reformed into a figurehead headmaster, watched, restricted, forced to teach under a dark mark that looms over the castle. Hogwarts shifts, as it always does with its headmaster's chains. Defense becomes dark arts theory, Muggle studies is quietly erased, and blood purity rhetoric seeps into every corridor. Most importantly, the moral center of Wizarding Britain is ripped out. There is no boy who lived, no rallying legend. There is only a generation of children, like Harry and Hermione, growing up in a world where survival means compromise, where love has to hide inside whispered conversations and smuggled books, where the idea of fighting back feels less like destiny and more like madness. And yet, under that permanent dark mark, something more profound is already beginning to form. The first fragile bonds of a new resistance, and a connection between 2 children who were never meant to be heroes, but who will decide that their future together is something worth fighting for. Love in a World Gone Wrong, framing Harry and Hermione's story. In a world where the dark mark hangs over the Ministry like a second moon, love cannot be soft background music. It has to be a battle cry whispered under your breath. So what if, in this harsher, compromised reality, the question isn't, who does Harry fancy, but who does he trust with his life when love and survival collide? This isn't a story about rejecting canon couples, or pretending that Harry and Ginny, Ron and Hermione, never worked on the page. This is a story about asking who these same people become when Hogwarts is not a relatively safe castle, but a training ground under a dark arts-bent headmaster, when Muggleborns like Hermione are hunted, and when every friendship is a potential liability. In that pressure cooker, who stands closest to Harry when it actually costs something? Canon already gives us the outline of that answer. When chaos erupts, Harry turns to Hermione. In the Chamber of Secrets aftermath, in the Time Turner night of Prisoner of Azkaban, in the impossible maze of the Triwizard Tournament, she is the one who believes him first, who stays up late with parchment and ink and a plan. Now imagine those same instincts under open tyranny, Ministry raids on Muggle-born families, Caro-style discipline introduced years earlier, detentions that leave scars instead of quills that write in blood, comfortable, familiar love, the kind that grows in Quidditch stands and common common room firesides, belongs to a Hogwarts where you can argue about homework and house points because you are fundamentally safe. But what if that safety never existed? What if, from first year, Harry and Hermione learned that they might not make it home for Christmas, that a wrong answer in dark arts could expose Hermione's blood status, that Harry's mysterious connection to Voldemort makes him both target and tool? In that world, love can't just be a crush. It has to be a refuge. It has to be something more profound. We're exploring a fiercer, riskier love, the bond between two people who become each other's only safe place in a regime built on fear. Their romance doesn't begin with a dramatic kiss after a Quidditch win. It begins with small, dangerous gestures. A banned Muggle psychology book slipped into Harry's bag because Hermione thinks understanding trauma might help him sleep. Coded notes passed in class that look like arithmancy equations but actually map out escape routes and secret meetings. Hermione learning healing charms far beyond her year so she can treat Harry's injuries in a hidden classroom because the hospital wing reports to the wrong people now. Most importantly, love itself becomes an act of defiance. Every time Harry shields Hermione in a corridor when Aurors patrol too close, every time Hermione lies flawlessly under Veritaserum because protecting Harry matters more than the law, they are rewriting what resistance looks like. It's not just Dumbledore's army, it's the quiet decision that their future together is something worth fighting for. Across this story, we'll examine how that connection grows, from awkward first-year partners in a corrupted Hogwarts, to co-conspirators smuggling half-blood classmates out of danger, to leaders of a second war that should never have been needed. How does being in love reshape their tactics, their mercy, their willingness to sacrifice? And when the moment finally comes to light a new spark of rebellion, will that love save the world, or demand a price even they aren't ready to pay? The rules of this dark game: thesis, scope, and roadmap. So we need rules. If we're going to tear canon in half and let Voldemort win, we can't just hurl Harry and Hermione into the dark and call it a day. We have to decide what if in a way that still feels like this world, these characters, this magic. The core thesis is simple, and also enormous. If Voldemort wins the First War, Harry and Hermione don't just survive as scattered survivors on opposite sides of a ruined map. They become the emotional and strategic center of a second resistance, and their love story quietly, relentlessly reshapes how that war is fought. This isn't a story about replacing one prophecy with another. This is a story about two people building something more profound than destiny in the shadow of a man who thought he'd already won. So what exactly are we exploring? First, Voldemort's victory itself. The Order of the Phoenix broken, the Ministry captured from the inside, Dumbledore sidelined or chained, the dark mark rising over a Britain that never got its boy who lived. We'll examine how he dodges the prophecy by never attacking Godric's Hollow, how James and Lily survive but lose everything that mattered, how pure-blood politics twist when the Dark Lord no longer needs to pretend. From there, we move into life under the regime. Hogwarts is rewritten into a polished dark arts academy, blood purity carved into the curriculum the way defense once was. Muggleborns like Hermione are hunted, catalogued, erased. Harry grows up as a marked orphan of the losing side, watched, contained, useful only as a symbol of Voldemort's total victory. How does love even begin in a place like that? Our roadmap is era by era, childhood under Voldemort, where Harry and Hermione's first connection is survival itself. Early Hogwarts, where friendship hardens into a secret bond in corridors lined with inquisitorial patrols. Mid-war adolescence, where they shift from quiet subversion to open conspiracy. And finally, the climactic uprising, where they no longer have the luxury of hiding what they feel or what they're willing to do together. Structurally, each era will open with a dramatized in-world scene, a late-night lesson with Snape that is not what it seems, a sorting ceremony conducted under a dark mark in the enchanted ceiling, a whispered argument in a forbidden stairwell where Hermione chooses rebellion over safety. Then, we'll pull back and unpack. What does this moment tell us about Voldemort's regime, about Harry's altered upbringing, about Hermione's survival as a Muggleborn, about Ron's diverted, damaged arc? Most importantly, we'll keep circling 3 questions. How does love survive in a surveillance state when portraits and portraits' shadows might be listening? How does their bond change the strategy of resistance? Who they save, who they spare, what they sacrifice, and who breaks under the pressure of this new timeline? Ron as he faces a crisis of loyalty, Dumbledore as he wagers one last gambit, Snape as his dangerous mentorship walks the edge of exposure and redemption. Along the way, we'll foreshadow the night Harry first realizes Hogwarts itself is a weapon. The moment Hermione chooses open rebellion instead of a forged blood status pass, the fracture where Ron almost turns away for good, and the final confrontation with Voldemort's regime where their love stops being a secret comfort and becomes something worth fighting for in the open. By the end of this roadmap, you'll know exactly where we're heading. The only question left will be, when the spark finally catches, who survives the fire it starts? From Safe Haven to Dark Academy, reframing Hogwarts under Voldemort. So if the spark is going to start a fire, we have to ask, what does the forest look like now that Voldemort already won? What if the place that was always our sanctuary in canon becomes the Dark Lord's proudest experiment, a school designed not to protect children, but to perfect obedience? Under Voldemort's regime, Hogwarts doesn't fall in one dramatic night, it erodes. Curriculum shifts first. Defense against the dark arts quietly loses the defense. Hex theory becomes curse optimization. Practical lessons are about control, how to disarm, how to dominate, how to hurt without leaving marks. Blood purity isn't whispered in Slytherin corners. It's printed in textbooks, diagrammed like arithmancy proves. Muggle studies survives, but twisted into propaganda, a catalog of Muggle weakness that justifies the new laws. And over all of it, there is ministry oversight, Death Eater-appointed staff who sit in on lessons, who read essays for signs of dangerous empathy. We're exploring a Hogwarts where Umbridge wasn't a one-year nightmare, she was the prototype. Take her surveillance, Snape's reluctant headmastership, the Carrow's open cruelty, and then ask, what if that wasn't an aberration, but the default? Detentions with blood quills become standard disciplinary tools. Public dueling demonstrations look an awful lot like sanctioned bullying. The Carrows, or wizards very much like them, don't just terrorize a resistance, they shape the next generation from day one. House dynamics warp under that pressure. Slytherin becomes a pipeline to power, an unofficial recruitment office where prefects pass along names to ministry youth programs. Gryffindor isn't just the house of troublemakers, it's the house of potential traitors, watched, cataloged, punished for reckless altruism. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw learn the most brutal lesson of all, survival through silence. Loyalty and intellect turn inward, away from open defiance and toward quiet self-preservation. Inter-house friendships don't just raise eyebrows, they raise reports. A Hufflepuff seen laughing with a Gryffindor after curfew might find their parents questioned at work the next week. This isn't a story about a quirky boarding school where rivalries are mostly about Quidditch. This is a story about trust becoming a liability, about kindness actually endangering the people you love. And in the middle of it, Voldemort keeps his trophies. Perhaps Dumbledore is one of them. Stripped of authority, wand monitored, paraded at feasts as a symbol of unity and forgiveness. He sits at the staff table like a warning. Even legends can be leashed. Snape, by contrast, is pushed forward. Headmaster, visible, feared. To the world, he is proof that half-bloods can rise if they are loyal. In reality, he walks a knife's edge, using that proximity to quietly shield a handful of students, those who remind him of Lily, those who might matter later, including one Muggle-born girl with forged half-blood papers and a too-quick mind for her own safety. Most importantly, this dark academy is where our central bond has to begin. So in a school where compassion is suspicious, where eye contact can be incriminating, what does it mean for 2 first years? One marked by Voldemort's favor, one marked for extermination, to find each other, to feel that first flicker of connection, and to decide, silently, that the other is something worth fighting for. Harry Potter, the Dark Lord's protected asset. So what does it mean in this dark academy that the boy sitting across the Great Hall from Hermione is not the boy who lived at all, but the boy who was spared? To answer that, we have to go back to a different Godric's Hollow. In this version, Voldemort stands in the ruined nursery, prophecy humming at the edges of his mind, and he does something canon never allowed. He bargains. James and Lily live, Harry lives, and the price is not written in blood on the floor, but in signatures on unbreakable contracts, in oaths that taste like ash the moment they speak them. This isn't a story about heroic martyrdom. This is a story about survival weaponized. James accepts a ministry post under the new regime. Lily consults on Muggle-born registration, trying to blunt the worst of it, while knowing her name is being used to legitimize the hunt. Their home in this what-if timeline is comfortable, magically reinforced, full of toys and books and carefully curated visitors. It is also full of guilt. Harry grows up hearing arguments through silencing charms that never quite hold. The hiss of his father's voice, "How many this week, Lily?" The crack in his mother's, "If we'd said no, we'd be dead. He'd be dead." No one ever tells him directly that his safety cost other people their lives, but children are experts in the spaces between words. He learns to read the way Lily's hand shakes when the prophet prints another amnesty story, using their smiling family photo as proof that reasonable opposition can be tamed. From Voldemort's perspective, it's perfect calculus. By keeping the Potters alive, he parades forgiveness as a dark virtue. Look, he can say to wavering purebloods and frightened half-bloods, "The famous James Potter serves on my councils. The brilliant Lily Evans advises my ministry. Their child plays in my world and is untouched." Opposition is not noble. It is foolish. Submit, and you, too, might be spared. Most importantly, Harry himself becomes propaganda. The name that should have been a rallying cry is neutralized, folded into the narrative of a merciful conqueror. He is photographed at carefully staged events, placed in front rows at trials, escorted through Hogwarts under the watchful eye of professors who report every stray word. He has access to resources, to books, to a measure of protection that other children can only dream of. He also grows up knowing that every kindness is observed, every misstep catalogued, every friend assessed for threat. So when the hat touches his head, the moment is not a rebellion, it is theater. Sorting Voldemort's favorite exception into Gryffindor proves a point. The Dark Lord is so confident he can allow a house of dissent to exist. Harry learns the script quickly. Loud loyalty in public, quiet questions in the dark, a careful performance of Gryffindor courage that never quite tips into open defiance. And yet, the cracks begin early. One night, 8 years old, pressed against the landing banister, he hears his parents whisper a name the regime has tried to erase. "If Dumbledore ever resurfaces," James begins. Lily cuts him off, voice tight with a fear Harry has never heard, even when she speaks of Voldemort. That single, forbidden name hangs in the air like a spell that might explode the whole house. Harry lies awake for hours, turning it over. If Voldemort is invincible, why are his parents still afraid of someone else? What kind of man terrifies even the people who made a deal with the Dark Lord? And when a Muggle-born girl with fierce eyes and a contraband book sits beside him on the Hogwarts Express, why does that name echo in his mind as their futures quietly, irrevocably begin to intertwine? Hermione Granger, the girl who shouldn't exist. Hermione Granger should not exist. Not in this world. Not in a Britain where the dark mark hangs over the ministry like a permanent storm cloud, where the Muggle-born Registration Commission isn't an emergency measure, but the quiet, everyday machinery of the state. In canon, that commission is an escalation, a wartime horror. Here, it is the baseline. Here, if your blood is wrong, your name goes in a ledger, your wand is a privilege on loan, and one unexpected knock at the door can mean you simply never come back. So how does a Muggle-born girl with contraband books end up on the Hogwarts Express, sitting beside Harry Potter? That's the first impossible question we're exploring. Hermione's survival begins years before her letter, in a cramped office deep inside a corrupted Hogwarts. McGonagall, still deputy headmistress, still steel-wrapped in tartan, sits with Dumbledore in chains behind her eyes, if not yet on his wrists. Together they do something quietly treasonous. They invent an ancestor. They forge parish records and school transcripts. They twist an old McGonagall family branch until it produces a distant witch who once married a Granger. On paper, Hermione becomes a half-blood, suspicious, but legal, a fragile fiction, one ministry audit, one overzealous Death Eater clerk, away from shattering. This isn't a story about clever paperwork saving the day. It is a story about how thin the line between life and disappearance really is. Hermione grows up brilliant and bookish in a house where the television volume is always a little too loud, just in case. Her parents, loving and terrified, are coached to never mention strange incidents to anyone. When the lights flicker as she cries, her mother calls it a power surge. When a school bully's shoelaces tie themselves together, her father laughs once, then never speaks of it again. Their conversations become coded, special instead of magic, our friends instead of the Order, that man instead of Voldemort. From the beginning, Hermione learns two truths that will define her. Knowledge is her weapon. Knowledge is also the thing that can get her killed, so she hoards it. She reads everything, then reads between the lines, noticing which historical figures vanish mid-chapter, which laws are described but never justified. Official textbooks talk about necessary reforms and blood stability. She copies the phrases perfectly in her homework because she has already understood that the rules are not suggestions, they are survival protocols. But under her mattress, she hides a battered Muggle history book and, later, a smuggled pre-war edition of Hogwarts. A history, its margins full of someone else's furious, cramped handwriting. What if the girl who in canon clings to rules because she believes in them, now clings to rules because breaking the wrong one means Azkaban, or worse? What does that pressure do to her? It intensifies everything. Her need to be right is no longer about pride. It is about safety. Her obedience is strategic, yet her curiosity is sharper, more dangerous. She memorizes her forged family tree the way other children memorize multiplication tables, reciting names and dates until they taste like truth. And then the letter comes. Thick parchment, green ink, the Hogwarts crest altered, the serpent just a fraction larger, the motto unchanged, but emptied of comfort. Voldemort's seal, pressed in dark wax, turns her excitement into something colder. Her parents hold it like it might explode. They are proud. They are horrified. On the train, Hermione sits alone at first. Back straight, new robes a little too big, clutching a stack of books like a shield. She watches reflections flicker in the compartment window and silently rehearses her fake history. Great-grandmother Euphemia Granger, née McGonagall, half-blood, respectable, safe. If anyone asks, she will smile. She will lie. And as the countryside blurs past, and a black-haired boy with a lightning-shaped scar enters her compartment, Hermione Granger steps over an invisible line into a life where every answer, every connection, every moment at Hogwarts could expose her, or finally give her something worth fighting for. First meeting on a watched train, sparks in the shadows. The compartment is too quiet, not the warm, chaotic buzz we remember from canon, with chocolate frog cards and Ron's sandwiches and a bossy girl looking for Neville's toad. Here, the silence is watchful. Here, the air itself feels like it's listening, because on this Hogwarts Express, every compartment hums with faint surveillance charms. Prefects have been briefed to report subversive talk. Certain words, Order, Dumbledore, Muggleborn, hang in the air like curses. And every first year has already learned the first rule of surviving Voldemort's Britain. You never know who is listening. You never know what if one wrong sentence follows you for the rest of your life. Harry feels it before anyone even sits down. The way conversations in the corridor stutter when someone says Potter. The way faces flicker between curiosity and fear when they glance at his scar, at the crest on his trunk, at the faint dark mark burned into the back of his father's hand in the prophet photographs. James Potter, war hero turned collaborator, one of the regime's most valuable Aurors. Harry Potter, ? So he ends up alone. Not because there isn't space, but because his surname creates distance more efficiently than any locking charm. A pair of Hufflepuff boys hesitate in his doorway, whisper, and move on. A prefect pauses, gives him a measuring look that is almost deferential, almost suspicious, and then slides the compartment door shut with careful politeness. Harry stares at the blurred countryside and feels, acutely, that this isn't a story about the boy who lived. This is a story about the boy everyone is already deciding how to use. The knock, when it comes, is too brisk to be reverent. Hermione stands there with her hair frizzing from the damp, her tie already straight, her expression a little too tight. She is not awestruck. She is calculating space, options, exits. Everywhere else is full, she says, then flushes, as if she's broken some unspoken rule by speaking first. I mean, nearly full. May I sit here? It is the awkward honesty that cuts through the haze around his name. She's not pretending she sought him out. She's not pretending she isn't nervous. And because she doesn't, he doesn't have to either. Yeah, Harry says. Of course. They sit for a few heartbeats. There is only the rattle of the train and the faint buzz of the listening charms in the corners. Then, Hermione does something almost reckless. She introduces herself with the wrong surname. Hermione Granger. My parents are... A fractional pause. Healers, not dentists, not muggles. A safe lie, polished and rehearsed. But her fingers twist together in her lap, betraying the effort it takes to keep the story straight. Harry watches, and we're exploring the very first glimmer of recognition. She is afraid of this world, in a way purebloods rarely are. He offers a careful half-truth in return. My dad works for the Ministry. No mention of raids, no mention of dark marks. They talk about classes instead, about houses, about how defense against the dark arts is now simply called dark arts. Their words tiptoe, their eyes do not. Most importantly, they both keep circling the same invisible line. How much can I trust you? How much can I afford not to? Pattern interrupt. The compartment door crashes open. A group of older Slytherins saunter past, green and silver prefect badges gleaming. Their conversation is loud, deliberate, a performance for the corridor. Did you hear? They caught 3 more mudbloods trying to cross the border. Filthy parasites never learn. Laughter, sharp and cruel. A joke about imported brides for half-blood families trying to climb. Harry's jaw tightens. Hermione's hands go still. Neither of them laughs. Neither of them speaks. But their eyes meet in the reflection on the glass. Not directly. Too dangerous. Too intimate. But side by side. 2 faces not joining in. That shared silent refusal is small. It is also extraordinary, because in a regime built on fear and performance, choosing not to perform is the first act of rebellion. And in that moment, without vows, without plans, without love yet, their bond begins. 2 children quietly deciding that they will not be that kind of wizard, that they will stand somehow together. We'll examine how that fragile, wordless agreement on a watched train becomes something more profound when Hogwarts itself turns against them, and when the cost of connection might be everything they have left. Year 1, Under the Dark Mark, learning the wrong lessons. Year 1, Under the Dark Mark, is where that decision is tested, because what if your first year at Hogwarts isn't a doorway into wonder, but an entrance exam for an empire? From the first timetable, the ideology is baked in. History of Magic is no longer Binns mumbling dates. It's Binns, still dead, but now animated by Ministry-approved notes, lingering on eras of pureblood stability, repeating, almost lovingly, the years when Muggles knew their place. Goblin rebellions are framed as proof that non-humans cannot be trusted with power. Grindelwald is mentioned only as a warning about charismatic half-blood radicals. Voldemort's first war is reduced to a necessary correction after Muggle interference. Defense against the dark arts, under a Carrow-like professor, is worse. Officially, it's about protection. In practice, it's controlled application, a phrase repeated so often it becomes liturgy. You do not learn to resist curses. You learn which curses you are allowed to cast under state oversight, which hexes are authorized responses against subversives. Every spell is graded not just on technique, but on obedience. Questions about intent, about ethics, are brushed aside with thin smiles and references to the Dark Lord's wisdom. And over everything, casual, open contempt for Muggle culture. Muggle studies is compulsory for Muggleborns, an hour a week of sneering at primitive technology and fragile societies that collapse without magic. Hermione sits through a lesson where the teacher describes electricity as a desperate imitation of Lumos and feels her hands shake under the desk. Harry's reaction is visceral. It's that gut-level anger we recognize from canon, the same fury that flares at Umbridge, but here it has nowhere safe to go. He clenches his fists when a Slytherin boy laughs about culling Muggleborns. He almost speaks up when Binns calls the Statute of Secrecy a mercy extended to lesser beings. Almost, because the mark on his world, the regime over his head, has taught him that open defiance means disappearances. Hermione's reaction is different, and that difference is exactly why their bond starts to become something more profound. Where Harry burns, she records. She copies down every twisted definition, every omission, every phrase like necessary correction. She haunts the library, cross-referencing old pre-war texts that survived the purges with the new curriculum. Her rebellion is in the margins. Tiny, neat notes that say, simply, false, or source. Together, their shared classes and late-night study sessions become a micro-world held together by whispered questions. In the back row of history, Hermione slides Harry a scrap of parchment. Why no mention of Dumbledore? In the library, they huddle over conflicting accounts of the same battle, tracing the gaps. Harry supplies the emotional memory, what his aunt let slip, what he overheard at the orphanage of war, and Hermione supplies the analysis. They correct the textbook narrative together, line by line, until the official story starts to sound thinner than their quiet, secret version. Ron enters this world on a diagonal. A pureblood from a compromised but surviving family, he fits more comfortably into the visible script. He knows the right phrases, the safe silences. His parents have made it clear, keep your head down, don't attract attention, remember who's in charge. Ron is uncomfortable with Voldemort, with the Carrows, with the way Muggleborns are cataloged like contraband, but his fear of endangering his family makes him slower to question openly. He laughs along at jokes he hates. He shushes Harry more than he challenges the lesson, and yet, slowly, he's drawn into that table in the library where Harry and Hermione are building a counter-history. He sees Hermione's notes, hears Harry's low, furious asides, and something in him starts to tilt. Not all at once, not heroically, but enough that he lingers, that he listens, that he occasionally mutters, "Dad says it wasn't like that." Most importantly, that first year is not about discovery, it's about disillusionment. In canon, the wonder of moving staircases and Quidditch matches defines the year. Here, those same marvels feel like distractions from the indoctrination humming underneath. Harry and Hermione are already learning that to stay sane, they have to quietly choose each other over the story the world is telling them. This isn't a story about children dazzled by magic. This is a story about children deciding, in whispers and shared glances, that truth, and the fragile love growing between them, might be something worth fighting for. And once you start choosing each other over the world's story, what happens when the world starts noticing? A forbidden library corner, the first real risk. The first time the world really notices them, it's because they choose to walk straight into its forbidden heart. The library after hours is not the warm, bookish refuge we remember from canon. Under Voldemort's regime, it feels like a stone mausoleum, the air thin and cold, the enchanted lamps banked low so that every aisle is a tunnel of shadow. The shelves loom higher, the chains on certain volumes heavier, and at the very back, the restricted section glows faintly with layered wards, a soft, sickly sheen against the dark. This isn't a story about children sneaking a peek at exciting curses. This is a story about two 13-year-olds deciding that ignorance is more dangerous than treason. Hermione is the one who says it, of course. We have to know. She whispers in the empty common room, fingers white around the edge of a ministry-approved history of magic text that skips straight from the Great Magical Reformation to our triumphant present. No first wizarding war, no Dumbledore, no order, no mention of what happens to Muggleborns, who simply stop coming back after holidays. What if this is all a lie, Harry? What if they're rewriting everything? Harry hesitates. Because he's a Potter, because his surname is already a quiet question in staff meetings and Slytherin corridors, because he can feel eyes on him even when there's no one there. But he also remembers the way Professor Sinistra's voice caught when she mentioned the old headmaster, the way his father went silent at the word prophecy. He can't stand not knowing. He never really could. "All right," he says, "together. James has smuggled him an invisibility cloak, a relic from a war that supposedly never happened, and it becomes less artifact and more crucible. There's only one, so they have to press close, shoulders and hips touching, Hermione's curls tickling his jaw as they move. Every breath feels loud. Every heartbeat feels like it should set off alarms. We're exploring what happens when physical closeness stops being an accident of circumstance and becomes a tactical necessity you secretly don't want to end." Under the cloak, Harry is aware of three things at once: the scrape of her shoe against stone, the faint citrus smell of her hair, and the fact that she is not shaking. Hermione is terrified. He can feel it in the tightness of her hand around his wrist, but she goes forward anyway, straight toward the wards that crackle faintly over the restricted section gate. She isn't just clever, he realizes, as she murmurs a counter-curse she definitely shouldn't know. She's brave in a way that terrifies him, because it's not reckless, not like his father's stories. It's precise, deliberate bravery, the kind that chooses danger with eyes open. And suddenly, most importantly, he finds he's more afraid of her being caught than of anything they might do to him. The regime can break a Potter, but Hermione they might erase. They slip through. Shelves rise around them like dark ribs. Titles flicker past, bloodline integrity and magical stability, the fallacy of equal wands. Consolidated war records, restricted. That last one calls to Hermione like gravity. The file they find is thin, its parchment brittle. Whole paragraphs have been scorched away or blacked out, but a few phrases remain, stark and defiant against the censor's ink. Albus Dumbledore, deposed. Order of the Phoenix, dismantled. Prophecy successfully neutralized. Harry's eyes catch on that one word, prophecy. The letters seem to burn. In that moment, the world tilts. What if the story his parents won't tell, the war the books pretend never quite happened, all circles back to him? Hermione's finger traces the margin where a name has been erased. If it was neutralized, she whispers, then who was it about? That's when they hear it. Footsteps, slow, measured, coming closer along the stone corridor outside, accompanied by the faint jingle of keys and the low murmur of a spell. For one suspended heartbeat, they freeze, pressed together under the cloak, the file still open between them. Run and leave it, or take it and risk the wards, the search, the questions that will never end. Harry looks at Hermione, Hermione looks at Harry, and in the dim, forbidden dark, they have to decide, right now, whether their first act of rebellion will be half-measured. Her hand tightens on the file, the doorknob begins to turn. Trust, touch, and tension, the emotional architecture of their bond. The doorknob begins to turn, and we pull back, just for a moment, from the mechanics of the heist to the mechanics of the heart. What if the real tension in that office isn't just whether they'll be caught, but how every shared risk is rewiring what Harry and Hermione mean to each other? In Voldemort's Hogwarts, danger doesn't ebb and flow with exams and Quidditch seasons. It's constant, it's structural, it sits in every lesson plan and every corridor patrol, and constant danger compresses timelines. Feelings that in canon might have taken years to surface. Quiet realizations in hospital wings, slow burn jealousy, the tent dance that finally breaks the silence. Here flare up faster, not as grand confessions, but as an almost desperate need to know that someone is on your side. When you can be dragged out of bed for questioning at any hour, you do not have the luxury of pretending indifference. So their bond evolves through touch long before either of them dares to call it love. Physical contact becomes a barometer, a survival metric as precise as any spell. A hand on Hermione's arm when a dark arts professor publicly humiliates her for her blood, fingers tightening just enough to say, "I'm here, don't rise to it." Harry stepping between her and a sneering Slytherin prefect, not with a shouted hex, but with his body, accepting the detention he knows will follow. Hermione, jaw clenched, wordlessly fixing Harry's injured hand after a disciplinary session with a blood quill. Her wand tracing careful healing charms, while her free hand refuses to let go of his wrist. We've seen echoes of this in canon, haven't we? The hospital wing visits after Quidditch falls, the way she throws her arms around him after the Triwizard Maze, the infamous tent dance in Deathly Hallows. But here, those same gestures are loaded with something more profound, because the stakes are literally life and death, not just exam scores or house points. A hug is not a cute epilogue to an adventure. It's a roll of the dice that someone might report what they saw. A shared blanket in a freezing tower isn't cozy. It's an act of rebellion against the isolation the regime is trying to enforce. And under all of this runs the sharpest internal conflict. Both of them know, from whispered stories about how Voldemort won the First War, that he weaponizes attachments. The more they rely on each other, the more they risk being used against each other. So every time Hermione reaches for Harry's hand, every time Harry waits for her nod before he lies to a teacher, they're asking a silent question. Are we making each other stronger, or painting a target on each other's backs? This isn't a story about love as a prize waiting at the end of a neatly finished quest. This is a story about love as the dangerous, necessary engine that starts the quest in the first place. Their growing closeness becomes the emotional thesis of the entire rebellion. Most importantly, it's what finally makes them willing to do the unthinkable, to stop surviving within Voldemort's world and begin planning how to break it. Because in a castle rewritten for cruelty, their bond is the one thing that still insists on being something worth fighting for, and that insistence, that refusal to let go of each other, is exactly what will turn two frightened students in a locked office into the accidental architects of a second wizarding war. Year 2. Basilisks, Bloodlines, and a Dark Lord's Propaganda. Year 2 begins with a whisper in the pipes and a sentence painted in blood. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened, enemies of the heir, beware. But what if that message appears on a wall in a Hogwarts already claimed by the Dark Lord, in corridors where the Dark Mark sometimes hangs like a banner? What if the fear it sparks doesn't challenge Voldemort's rule at all, but tightens it? Under this regime, the chamber attacks are seized instantly as narrative, as weapon. The official line is smooth, almost sympathetic, tragic, regrettable, an unfortunate excess of an ancient Slytherin legacy. The Prophet prints unsigned editorials about old magic's waking in response to the strain of integrating less suitable pupils. Ministry officials shake their heads and say, no one wants children hurt. Of course not, but can we really be surprised when impure bloodlines provoke old wards and older creatures? This isn't a story about a school under siege from within. This is a story about power using a monster it barely understands. To justify shackles, it understands perfectly. Curfews tighten, patrols double, muggleborns and half-bloods are escorted everywhere, not for their safety, but for surveillance. And Hermione, with her forged pureblood file and carefully memorized family tree, walks through those corridors feeling the basilisk's hiss as only the second most dangerous sound in her life. Because if her secret breaks, it's not just a serpent hunting her, it's the entire system. We're exploring a Hermione who flinches at every new attack, not just from compassion, but from calculation. How many more victims before the Ministry demands Hogwarts be cleansed of suspect students? How long before random blood tests become mandatory? She lies awake counting loopholes in the law, not sheep. She rereads the forged parchment that claims her grandparents fought in obscure pureblood duels, tracing the ink as if contact alone can keep it real. Harry, marked as the Dark Lord's strange favorite, and yet never quite trusted, is caught in the crossfire of narratives. In class, professors echo the propaganda. Ancient magic is reacting to dilution. This is sad, but understandable. In the common room, pureblood classmates repeat it with less polish and more venom. And then there's Hermione, eyes dark and furious, whispering, "It's murder, Harry. It's murder being used as policy. Whose reality does he believe?" There's a moment in the library when the pattern finally clicks. Not just the pipes, the Parseltongue, the legend, the politics. Hermione spreads notes across the table, old Hogwarts histories, Salazar's rants about purity, recent decrees about Muggleborn registrations, and says, very quietly, if they can blame this on ancient Slytherin magic, they never have to admit they want people like me gone anyway. That's the pattern interrupt for Harry, not the monster, the motive. From that point, their investigation is not a schoolboy adventure, it's triage. Every clue they piece together about the chamber is weighed against a clock only Hermione can fully feel. The moment the regime uses the next attack to close the castle to anyone whose blood they question, she knows she will be first on that list. He knows he can't let that happen, so they move together, down corridors, through secrets, into danger. When chaos meets logic, when courage meets brilliance, when love is still only an unnamed pressure in the air between them, the hunt for the basilisk becomes rehearsal, not just for saving lives, but for planning operations under surveillance, for trusting each other's judgment against the official story, for choosing their bond over the world they were told to accept. Most importantly, solving the chamber isn't their victory lap, it's their first draft. A rough, terrified, extraordinary prototype of the joint, high-stakes missions they will one day run not against a hidden monster in the walls, but against the Dark Lord who owns the walls themselves. The Catalyst, a dark lake, a silver stag, and a choice. Their first mission in the pipes is only the rehearsal. The real test comes not in hidden chambers, but in plain sight on a day that is supposed to be safe. The dark arts practicum is billed as experiential defense. That's what they call it now. Not defense against the dark arts. Not protection, not resistance. Experience, exposure, adaptation. The language of a regime that expects children to acclimate to horror. They march them to the Black Lake in regimented lines, black-robed figures reflected in the water like a procession of shadows. Above the castle, the Dark Mark hangs, as it always does, a permanent brand on the sky, but as the lesson begins, even that sickly green seems to dim. The air tightens. The temperature drops with that unmistakable, marrow-deep cold we in canon associate with Azkaban, but here it's a scheduled class period. Harry's breath fogs in front of him, each exhale a small white ghost. The surface of the lake ripples, then stills, as if the water itself is holding its breath, and then the Dementors glide forward. He expects his parents' screams. He's almost braced for them, but this isn't that memory. This world has had time to give him new nightmares. He hears echoing cries from raids he's seen from a distance, the crack of wands during Voldemort's purges, the panicked voice of a man at the ministry begging for his children, voices he couldn't save, voices he was told not to save. Beside him, Hermione goes rigid. Her hand twitches toward his, then falls. The Dementor's presence claws through her carefully built composure, ripping right past exam schedules and meticulously memorized statutes. She is back on a Muggle street watching black-robed figures descend on the neighbors who used to wave at her parents, hearing the slam of a door, the cut-off scream of a Muggle-born girl she'd helped with maths. She sways, her knees buckle. Harry sees her start to fall before he even registers his own fear. The lesson, the watching Death Eater instructor, the other students, all of it blurs. There is only Hermione, her lips drained of color, her eyes unfocused, her body folding under a weight she cannot outthink. What if this is how he loses her? Not in a grand duel, not in some prophecy-ordained showdown, but in a controlled demonstration that was never meant to be controlled at all. The Dementors press closer. The cold becomes a living thing, seeping into his bones. He hears the purges again, louder, layered with a newer sound now. Hermione's strangled breath, the almost sob she doesn't quite let escape. Something in him snaps, or maybe it finally aligns. This isn't a story about technique. No chocolate bar, no properly executed wrist flick. Harry has been taught the Patronus charm in theory, yes, drilled on incantations and appropriate loyalties. But what we're exploring here is what happens when the spell stops being academic and becomes a refusal. He drags Hermione up against him with one arm, feels how she's shaking, how light she suddenly seems. His wand hand rises of its own accord. He doesn't think of Quidditch victories or house points. He doesn't even reach for his parents. In this moment, all he can think is a single blazing decision. He will not let this world take her too. Expecto Patronum. The words tear out of him, raw and almost broken. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then light explodes. A silver stag bursts from the tip of his wand, not a weak wisp, but a fully formed, charging guardian that hits the Dementors like a physical force. The cold recoils, the screams cut off mid-echo. The stag lowers its antlers and drives them back, hooves striking the air above the black water, casting wild reflections that look like a different sky entirely. Around them, students gasp. The instructor's barked orders sound distant, distorted. Harry's world has narrowed to the feel of Hermione clutching at his robes, anchoring herself on him as the Dementors retreat to the far edge of the lake. The dark mark overhead flickers, just for a second, as if the spellwork that holds it resents this intrusion of silver. When the stag finally fades, the silence is deafening. The cold lingers, but it's thinner now, frayed at the edges. Hermione is still shaking. Harry keeps his arm around her without thinking, drawing her in against his side. She doesn't pull away. Her fingers curl into his sleeve, like she's afraid that if she lets go, she'll slip back into that Muggle street and never return. Their eyes meet. This is a story about a different kind of magic, and they both know it. The connection humming between them is not safe, not sanctioned. It is something more profound than comfort, something worth fighting for, and therefore, in this world, something worth punishing. We'll examine the politics of that later. For now, we stay in this charged, fragile aftermath, with Harry's heart still pounding, Hermione's breath still uneven, and the quiet, terrible realization settling over both of them. Loving each other might be the most dangerous choice they ever make, and someone, watching from the shadows near the tree line, has just seen everything. Defining the line, when friendship turns into something else. The forest holds its breath. Two teenagers, shaking in each other's arms, have just survived because Harry's magic chose Hermione. This is where the line moves. Up to now, they could pretend this was a story about comrades, about two bright, stubborn children growing up too fast under a dark mark sky. But what if the Patronus has just betrayed them both, revealing something more profound than either is ready to name? We're exploring that exact moment. Harry on the ground, wand still warm, Hermione pressed against his chest because he dragged her there without thinking. In canon, his Patronus is tied to abstract hope, to a faceless idea of his parents, and a future where he isn't hunted. Here, under Voldemort's rule, hope has a face. It has wild hair, ink-stained fingers, and a blood status that could get her killed. When the Dementors closed in, Harry didn't cast to survive. He cast to shield Hermione. His happiest memory wasn't Quidditch, or a house cup, or some vague promise of freedom. It was the flash image of a future where she is safe, alive, still arguing with him in some hidden library, while the world outside remains terrible, but survivable, because they're together. That is the pivot. The magic knows before he does. How does Hermione file that away? She tries to be Hermione about it. Trauma bonding, she tells herself. Battlefield instinct. Of course he pulled her close. She was the nearest ally, the most logical person to protect. She recites the arguments like a spell, cataloging variables, rehearsing rational explanations, but her body refuses the footnote. Her pulse spikes when his arm locks around her waist. Her knees almost give when she hears him shout her name instead of run. Later, in bed at the Muggle-born safe house, when a door slams downstairs, her mind does not reach for her parents, or McGonagall, or even Dumbledore in chains. It reaches for Harry's voice, for the way he said, "I've got you," like a promise he intends to keep. Canon gives them years to circle, to deny, to misread. Here, the regime steals that luxury. There is no slow drift from crush to confession, no Yule Ball miscommunication stretched over safe school terms. External pressure strips away some of the dithering. Either you trust someone with your life today, or you probably die tomorrow. But under a totalitarian state, they also can't afford open declarations. So what grows between them is a constant, simmering tension, fingers brushing in the dark, half-finished sentences, eye contact that lasts one heartbeat too long before both look away, and the politics of that are lethal. Harry is a symbol Voldemort intends to weaponize, the spared boy, the tamed prophecy, the living proof that resistance is futile. Hermione, by contrast, is a walking violation of his ideology, Muggle-born, brilliant, defiant. If the regime ever realizes that the regime's prized asset actually cares more about a Muggle-born girl than his own safety, she becomes the perfect hostage, the perfect test, the perfect leash. So their unspoken love becomes both shield and crack. It gives Harry a reason to fight that is not abstract prophecy, but something worth fighting for in the most intimate sense. It gives Hermione a personal stake beyond justice. She is not just saving the world, she is trying to save the boy who held her like the future depended on it. Most importantly, it will warp every strategic choice from here on. How honest can they be with Ron without painting a target on her back? How much do they tell Dumbledore, whose last gambit might ask Harry to sacrifice everything, including her? Even Snape becomes a different equation. Can they risk letting a Legilimens anywhere near a bond this dangerous? We'll examine how that invisible line, crossed in a flash of silver light, reshapes the rebellion itself, and how the Watcher in the trees decides what to do with what they've just seen. Ron Weasley and the Shadow of Compromise. The Watcher in the trees has a choice. Report what they've seen, this forbidden bond, this dangerous connection, or stay silent and let it grow. But far from the forest, in a cramped, overfull burrow that survived the First War by inches, another choice has been quietly shaping itself for years. Because what if the Weasleys didn't die for their principles this time? What if they lived with them, day after day, under a dark-marked sky? Arthur Weasley still works at the Ministry, but this isn't the genial backwater of misuse of Muggle artifacts. Under Voldemort's regime, his department is a cage disguised as a desk, monitoring Muggle contraband not to protect Muggles, but to control them, filing reports that help track undesirable magic. Every memo is watched. Every flu call is logged. He smiles too much, agrees too quickly, and knows that one wrong word could mean his entire family disappears, like the cousin no one mentions at dinner. Molly clings to domestic normalcy like a shield. Perfectly folded jumpers, overfull plates, birthdays celebrated even when there's nothing to celebrate. This isn't a story about a cozy kitchen. This is a story about a woman who has decided that if the world beyond her garden is poisoned, then she will make the burrow the last uncontaminated space, even if it means pretending not to hear the wireless when names are read out. Ron grows up in that tension, bravery in his bones, caution in his lungs. He learns early that you can laugh loudly but speak softly, that you can complain about homework but never about policy, that some questions are like saying Voldemort's name out loud. They pull attention toward you. He hears whispered arguments through thin walls. Arthur wanting to do more, Molly reminding him of the pre-wet brothers, of empty chairs that never filled again. He knows, with the deep animal certainty of a child, that drawing attention is dangerous. So when he meets Harry and Hermione at Hogwarts rewritten, the Hogwarts where dark arts is core curriculum and Muggleborns are evaluated, their courage feels extraordinary and terrifying all at once. Harry, marked and watched, walks the corridors like someone who has nothing left to lose. Hermione, a Muggleborn who should have hidden, questions everything with a precision that makes teachers flinch. Ron admires them. Of course he does, but he also resents that Harry's relative protection, Voldemort's twisted interest, gives him a margin of safety Ron's family will never have. He loves Hermione's mind, but when she challenges a blood purity lecture out loud, his first instinct isn't pride, it's panic. We're exploring a trio dynamic where the first real fractures aren't about missed Quidditch tryouts or jealous glances at the Yule Ball, they're about survival strategies. Harry and Hermione want to map the regime, test boundaries, poke at the edges of the cage. Ron knows the cage bites back. Picture a moment in the common room after curfew. Hermione has just outlined a plan to copy restricted ministry decrees from the library's locked section. Harry is already nodding, seeing opportunity. Ron, heart-pounding, says, "Drop it, please. This isn't worth it." On the surface, it's an argument like any other. Underneath, it's a plea. Don't make me choose between you and my family's lives. Pattern interrupt. In canon, Ron walking away in Deathly Hallows is a late-game crisis. Here, that choice is seeded from first year. Every time he urges them to let it go, every time he refuses to help with a dangerous question, the fault line widens. Are you reckless or are you a coward? Are you loyal to your friends or to the people who raised you to survive by keeping your head down? Most importantly, Ron's arc in this timeline crystallizes into something more profound than comic relief or jealous best mate. He becomes the embodiment of the compromised generation, the children of those who outlived the First War, by bending without quite breaking. When the Second Rebellion finally takes shape, when Harry and Hermione decide that love and resistance are the same fight, Ron will stand at a crossroads his parents never truly faced. Does he inherit their survival strategy, protecting the burrow by staying just useful enough to the regime? Or does he finally step fully into open rebellion, knowing that standing beside these two might not only get him killed, but might paint a target on every Weasley door? We'll examine how that brutal choice doesn't just redefine Ron, but reshapes what together means for the trio in a world where even love is an act of treason. Year 3. The prisoner who knows too much. So what happens when terrorist stops being an abstract word on the prophet's front page and suddenly has a name, a face, and a direct line into Harry's past? Year 3 in this darker canon opens with bars, not just on Privet Drive windows, but across the whole country's imagination. Sirius Black is the headline, not Voldemort's alleged servant, but the one wizard who allegedly tried to assassinate the Dark Lord himself. The regime calls him a fanatic, a traitor to his pure-blood name, the madman who tried to blow open the lie of Godric's Hollow and expose the Potter's bargain. What if the most infamous prisoner in Azkaban isn't the man who betrayed James and Lily, but the friend who refused to accept that their surrender was the only way to keep Harry alive? That single shift changes everything. It means that when Sirius escapes, Voldemort's newspapers don't whisper, they scream. Dementors flood the train lines, patrol the Hogwarts grounds, and the official line is clear. This isn't a story about justice. This is a story about control. We're exploring a Hogwarts that becomes a test case for total surveillance, extra patrols in the corridors, random bag searches, wellness interviews for students with sensitive family ties. Harry, the boy who is supposed to be the regime's carefully neutralized symbol, finds himself shadowed by Aurors in black and silver, every owl to and from him quietly logged. Hermione watches the pattern form and feels the chill. When power is afraid, it always calls its fear security. Harry's reaction is messy, human, painfully real. He has grown up with a single narrative. Sirius Black betrayed his parents. Sirius Black killed innocents. Sirius Black is the reason James and Lily had to kneel. But then there are the cracks. McGonagall's flinch when she says Sirius's name. Snape's venom that feels too personal. A slip in a Daily Prophet article, where dates don't quite match. Hermione, armed with the library and an almost reckless love for the truth, starts cross-referencing trial records, Wizengamot minutes, Old Order rosters that survived the Purge. Their investigation into Sirius becomes an investigation into Harry himself, a sealed hearing where Dumbledore argued with the Ministry about prophetic conditions, a fragment of a pensive memory, half corrupted, where Dumbledore whispers that Voldemort must mark the boy as his equal, or the prophecy will never activate, a letter from Lily, hidden in the false bottom of an old trunk, hinting that Harry was once meant to end the war, not decorate its aftermath. Most importantly, Sirius knows. He knows the original plan, the night in Godric's Hollow that never happened, the way James raged when Dumbledore suggested turning their son into a weapon. When Harry and Hermione finally piece together that this terrorist is the last living witness to the prophecy's true wording, something shifts between them. Their bond stops being just survival and homework and quiet, stolen moments of almost love in the library. It becomes conspiracy, it becomes choice. Because once Harry understands that he wasn't born to be neutral, he was born to be Voldemort's end, every safe path collapses. And Hermione, the one person he actually trusts to see all of him, has to help him answer the question that could ignite a second war. What if claiming that destiny is the most dangerous, and the most necessary thing they will ever do together? And if Sirius Black is the key, how far are they willing to go to reach him before the regime does? Shattered stories. When Harry learns what he was meant to be, so we follow them into the one place Hogwarts still remembers how to hide its secrets. The Room of Requirement doesn't look like a training hall tonight. It looks like a mausoleum for a war that never quite happened the way it was meant to. Shelves of cracked pensive vials, burned order letters pinned like insect wings, a tattered tapestry with the phoenix emblem scorched black. This is the Resistance Archive, the place where Dumbledore's last gambit is written in fragments, and in the middle of it, pacing like a caged thing, is Sirius Black. He's thinner than canon ever let him be, eyes fever bright, Azkaban and years underground carved into his face. When Harry and Hermione slip through the door, he doesn't waste time on greetings. "You want to know why they're hunting you, kid?" he says, voice ragged. "You want to know what Voldemort dodged in Godric's Hollow?" What if the story Harry has always been told, wrong place, wrong time, lucky escape from recruitment, shatters in 3 sentences? Sirius talks about the prophecy, about Sybil Trelawney's shaking voice in that dingy hogshead room. Born as the 7th month dies, marked as his equal, either must die at the hand of the other. We're exploring what it means when Voldemort heard just enough to be afraid, and then chose the safer target, the Longbottoms, not the Potters. Except James and Lily did something extraordinary. They bargained. They offered themselves, their son, their silence. No attack on Godric's Hollow, no mark on Harry, the prophecy left to sleep. In exchange, information, time, just enough betrayal to collapse the order from the inside. Harry's world doesn't crack, it implodes inward. His scarless forehead, the thing that always made him feel almost normal in a world obsessed with legends, is suddenly the loudest accusation in the room. He was meant to be marked, meant to be Voldemort's equal. His entire life, the absence of pain on his skin has been a monument to a choice made over his head, a trait of destiny for survival. Who is he if he was supposed to be something else? Who is he if his parents chose not just to live, but to let the war end without him? Harry can't ask. He can't make the words form. So Hermione does. This isn't a story about her being polite. This is a story about precision as courage. Did the prophecy guarantee Voldemort's fall if he marked Harry? She demands, voice shaking but steady. Or was it only a possibility? If the condition was never met, does that mean it can still be activated? We'll examine the language like she does. Either must die, not will. A path, not a promise. Most importantly, she drags the conversation into the present. If he chooses that path now, she says, and we hear the if like a knife, what does it actually change? What options do we have that we didn't before? That's the moment Harry looks at her and really sees the cost. If he steps into the role he was meant to play, he isn't just risking himself. He is choosing open war with the regime that would have erased her at 11. He is dragging a Muggle-born girl, who was never supposed to survive this curriculum of dark arts and blood laws, into the center of a prophecy she was never named in. Their bond has always been something more profound than house points and homework. In this moment, it becomes something worth fighting for, or breaking for. Silence settles. The room tightens around them, shelves creaking, as if the castle itself is listening for his answer. Hermione reaches across the table of relics and takes his hand. No speeches, no strategy, just skin against skin, a connection that has held through detentions, raids, and whispered plans in dark corridors. "You don't have to do this alone," she tells him. "And you're too late to protect me by staying small. I've already chosen your side." The prophecy may not have marked her, but love just did. And that, more than any old words in a dusty orb, is what Voldemort should be afraid of, because if Harry decides to claim the destiny his parents traded away, he won't be walking into that war as a lone chosen one. He'll be walking in hand with the one person he cannot afford to lose. So the real question becomes, in a world this dark, how do you lead a rebellion when the thing you're fighting for is sitting right beside you, holding your hand and refusing to let go? Love as strategy, choosing each other, choosing war. So when do they stop just holding hands in the dark and start treating that handclasp as a battle plan? It happens in stages, but there is a single, blinding moment of clarity, the night they finally understand the full shape of the prophecy and the way Voldemort stepped neatly around it. Dumbledore doesn't speak in riddles this time. He lays it out. If Voldemort never marked Harry as his equal, the prophecy can sleep forever. No chosen one, no destined duel, just endless rule. And that's when Hermione says, very quietly, "So if we do nothing, he wins by default." This is the pivot from reactive survival to proactive planning. Up to now, they've been dodging detentions, smuggling notes, shielding each other from the worst of Hogwarts as Dark Arts Academy. They're brilliant at surviving, but what if survival is exactly what Voldemort wants from them? A generation too cowed, too traumatized, to imagine something more profound than keeping their heads down. Once they see that passivity is a choice in Voldemort's favor, they can't unsee it. This isn't a story about two kids hiding in broom cupboards. This is a story about two tacticians who realize that every essay Hermione writes for a blood purity curriculum, every duel Harry refuses, is another brick in Voldemort's permanent victory. From that night, their love stops being just a refuge and becomes part of the strategic calculus. They are more willing to take risks, deadly risks, if it means keeping each other alive. Harry volunteers for the cursed patrol routes because he refuses to let Hermione's name appear on the rota. Hermione hacks the timetable itself, diverting her to the same corridors, the same classes, the same underground meetings. Together is safer, apart is unacceptable. But that same bond makes them cautious in new, almost military ways. Operations that separate them, immediately suspect. Missions where one goes in and the other can't cover. They argue, they dissect, they often refuse. In canon, the Horcrux hunt strains them. The relationship complicates the mission. Here, the relationship is the mission's foundation. Their trust is the asset. It's what lets them plan bolder moves inside a school crawling with Death Eaters, because each knows absolutely how the other will think under fire. Yet there's a cost, and Hermione feels it first. She's the one who runs the numbers, who remembers that Muggleborns are being hunted in the streets, while she's drawing up escape routes for one boy. She has to ask herself, again and again, if it were anyone else in danger, would I risk this much? If sacrificing Harry could end the regime, could she? Most importantly, does loving him make her less fit to lead a rebellion whose stakes are global? Here's the pattern interrupt. She doesn't solve that ethical equation. She chooses anyway. She chooses Harry. Harry chooses her. And by choosing each other openly, if still secretly, they are, in effect, declaring war. They stop pretending their relationship is a separate private comfort and start treating it as the core of a shared campaign. They coordinate with Dumbledore, with Snape's reluctant allegiance, as a unit. They walk the corridors not as students in a dark school, but as co-conspirators whose every whispered plan, every stolen kiss, is treason. In that moment, the Second War doesn't begin with a prophecy fulfilled. It begins with a promise kept. We stay together, and we fight. Year 4, a twisted tournament and a public stage. They stay together, and they fight. But what happens when the fight itself is turned into a spectacle? Under Voldemort's regime, the Triwizard Tournament doesn't vanish, it mutates. What if instead of a dangerous school tradition returning from the past, it's relaunched as the Dark Lord's favorite performance, a carefully scripted declaration that his Britain is the center of the magical world? Durmstrang arrives, not in a ghostly ship, but in a flotilla of black-sailed barges on the Thames, Beauxbatons, in gleaming carriages that circle a sky already patrolled by Inferius-ridden Thestrals. The message is simple. You will come to us. You will compete on our terms. You will applaud. Voldemort calls it a festival of unity. We know better. We're exploring how a man who weaponized fear in canon would now weaponize pageantry, using foreign champions as living proof that even other nations bow to his vision. The goblet is no longer an impartial judge. It's a blood-warded relic, charmed by Snape under duress and overseen by a ministry that has replaced impartiality with ideology, and into that blue-white fire, Harry's name doesn't fall by accident. It is placed. He's the son of a reformed James Potter, the boy whose survival disproved the prophecy and therefore proves, in Voldemort's narrative, that destiny itself has surrendered. Of course, the cameras, yes, literal omniocular crews from the Prophet and foreign papers, swing to him when the fourth name is read. Of course, the crowd is prompted to cheer. This isn't a story about a boy unfairly dragged into danger by a cursed cup. This is a story about a regime dressing compulsion up as honor. Harry is ordered to smile, to shake hands with Krum and the Beauxbatons champion beneath a hovering dark mark, to be the model of compliant heroism, brave, talented, loyal to the new order. Every task is framed to flatter Voldemort's ideology. The Dragon Arena is ringed with banners quoting his speeches. The Black Lake task is explicitly about rescuing what you value from the mud, a cruel metaphor everyone understands, and Hermione, publicly, she is perfect propaganda, the brilliant half-blood who proves that the Dark Lord is merciful if you submit. She sits in the stands beside carefully chosen purebloods, answering foreign students' questions with rehearsed lines, clapping at the right moments. She even lets herself be interviewed about Harry, his focus, his discipline, how grateful they are for stability. Privately, every cheer is a coded signal. Every foreign accent is an opportunity. She slips enchanted parchment to a Beauxbaton girl whose brother disappeared in the purges, trades arithmancy notes with a Durmstrang boy who hates Karkaroff, maps the new security wards while pretending to swoon over spellwork. We'll examine how each task's chaos, smoke, screaming, shifting wards, actually opens seams in the regime's armor that only someone like Hermione would notice. But using the tournament this way costs them. They cannot always sit together. They cannot always look at each other the way they want to. If the cameras linger too long on their connection, if a Death Eater reads too much into one touch, suspicion follows. So their moments shrink. A hand brushed in a corridor, a snatched whisper behind a tapestry, an argument that flares too hot because fear is always in the room. What if this disagreement about a plan is the last thing they ever say to each other? What if choosing the wrong ally from Beauxbaton means Harry dies in the second task? Most importantly, the tournament that was designed to crown Voldemort as undisputed master of Europe becomes something more profound. A stage, a broadcast, a chance. If Harry and Hermione can turn even one task into a visible act of defiance, free a captive the Dark Lord meant to execute, expose a lie in front of foreign reporters, make the world see what Hogwarts has become, then their love and their rebellion stop being private. They become something worth fighting for, not just for them, but for everyone watching. And as the first task looms, Harry looks at the dragon, Hermione looks at the cameras, and they both realize the same terrifying, extraordinary truth. This is their first real opportunity to strike back where Voldemort can't ignore it. Fire, water, and dragons, a trial by ordeal for two hearts. The roar hits first. Flame against winter air, iron chains groaning, and above it all, the dark mark burning low over the stadium like a 6-second sun. This is not the Triwizard Tournament we remember from canon. This is spectacle under occupation. A state broadcast where every robed official in the stands, every foreign delegation in their cordoned-off boxes, is watching to see whether Voldemort's favorite symbol of unity performs or dies. We're exploring a world where Hogwarts has been rewritten, where the stands are lined with black and silver banners, where cameras, sleek, ministry-approved omnioculars, hover like mechanical flies. Harry steps into the arena, dragonhide armor catching the green light, and the crowd surges in a low, hungry murmur. He is the boy the regime parades as proof that even war orphans can be shaped into loyal champions. He is also, secretly, Hermione's. What if Voldemort looked at the first task and saw an opportunity, not just to entertain, but to remind everyone that love, fame, even favor mean nothing if you fail? So the dragon is bigger than in canon, older, its scales blackened with curse scars, its chains are thinner, its handler team is half Death Eater, half terrified foreign experts. And in a shadowed corridor beneath the stands, Hermione Granger realizes why. She's not meant to be here. Muggleborns are allowed in the stands, not near the handler's pens. But Hermione has always moved where knowledge lives, and intercepted notes from a French liaison, scribbled in broken English about compromised restraint arrays and unacceptable risk, have pulled her down here. When she hears two officials whispering, the blood drains from her face. If the left foreleg cuff fails, it will look like a miscast binding, nothing more. And if Potter can't shield in time, well, accidents happen. This isn't a story about a slightly more dangerous task. This is a story about a public execution with plausible deniability, about a regime that will actually murder its own poster boy if it proves useful. Hermione feels the world tilt. Harry isn't walking into a challenge. He's walking into a death trap. What do you do when the person you love is about to die for a lie you both already hate? When the only way to save him will expose you as a traitor on live, enchanted broadcast? Most importantly, what if this is the moment their private rebellion becomes something more profound? Hermione's decision is not neat. Her hands shake. She thinks of her parents, already under surveillance. She thinks of Dumbledore in chains, of Muggleborns, re-educated, of Harry's quiet promise the night before. We survive this together. Then she acts. She doesn't run to him. The wards would stop her. Instead, she goes for the wards themselves. With a wand movement she should not know, an adaptation of Protean charm theory and Patronus work they developed in secret, she hijacks the stadium's sonorous lattice. Her voice, raw and terrified, explodes over the arena. Harry, the chains are cursed to fail on the left. Don't trust the handlers. Get to the water, now. The stands freeze. Officials lunge for control panels. The dark mark above them flickers. Harry doesn't hesitate. Their bond is too deep for that. He dives, rolls, sprints not for the golden egg, as rehearsed, but for the moat ringing the arena, conjuring a shield just as the left restraint shatters with a deliberate, vicious snap. Flame follows. It hits the water, turning steam into a temporary curtain, buying him seconds. Only seconds, but enough. We'll examine the tactics another time, the underwater dash, the desperate use of bubblehead and freezing charms. But the outcome is simple. Harry lives because Hermione broke the script, because she chose love over fear in front of the whole world. When the dragon is finally subdued and Harry dragged, coughing, from the water, the applause is thin and confused. The officials' faces are white with fury. Hermione is already being escorted away, wands at her back, her expression steady, only because if she looks afraid, Harry will break. Their eyes meet across the arena. No words, just a single extraordinary understanding. They have crossed a line they can never uncross. And as the dark mark steadies itself overhead, as whispers ripple through Hogwarts and beyond, one question hangs in the charged smoky air. What price will the Dark Lord demand now that he's seen exactly how far they'll go for each other? Cracks in the mask, when the world starts to notice. The dark mark fades from a violent shimmer to a steady, poisonous glow, and the regime moves fast to smother the story before it can breathe. Within hours, the prophet prints its script, a minor procedural disruption, a miscalibrated ward, nothing more. The official statement is brisk, cold, and utterly dishonest. No mention of the way the maze twisted against its own design. No mention of Harry's name vanishing from the scoreboard. Certainly no mention of Hermione Granger sprinting into the arena like she believed love could outpace a killing curse. But while the headlines downplay, the corridors of power do not. Quiet interrogations begin that same night. Staff are summoned one by one to shadowed rooms. Students are questioned in informal conversations that always end with someone's memories just a little hazier. Filch is given new directives. Snape is told to watch more closely. The Carrows tighten patrols. Harry, Hermione, and anyone who has been seen laughing with them, studying with them, sitting too close at meals, all find themselves under a new, invisible lens. This is where the mask really cracks. Because Hogwarts is not sealed, the tournament has brought foreign eyes. Durmstrang's delegation leaves with whispers instead of trophies. Some of their staff see only recklessness. A Dark Lord so arrogant, he allows chaos inside his own showcase. But a few, the ones who remember the First War too clearly, see something else. They see a Muggle-born girl defy a rigged system and survive. They see the mark flare, as if in response to a challenge from within, and at Beauxbaton's carriage, late at night, a discreet owl changes course. A visiting charms mistress who once studied under Flitwick sends a carefully worded letter, not to Dumbledore, but to a name she's heard in passing, always in the same breath as impossible exam scores and dangerous questions. Hermione Granger. What if, she suggests between the lines, resistance is not dead in Britain, merely waiting for contact. Inside the trio, the shockwaves are just as sharp. Ron watches Harry and Hermione with a new, queasy clarity. He saw her leap. He saw Harry's face when he thought he'd lost her. He's always known they were close. Now he understands how far they're willing to go together. Admiration wars with terror. Because if the Dark Lord noticed that look between them, and of course he did, then standing at their side feels less like friendship and more like volunteering for execution. So Ron starts pulling back. A missed study session here, an excuse there. He laughs louder with other friends. He avoids empty classrooms where Harry and Hermione revise defense tactics. It isn't betrayal, not yet. It's self-preservation from someone who has finally realized that in this world, proximity to Harry Potter and Hermione Granger might be a death sentence. For Harry, the emotional cost hits in the quiet moments after. He lies awake, replaying the image of Hermione on the stands, wand out, eyes wild with fear for him. She risked everything, her position, her safety, her already precarious status as a Muggle-born in a blood-purist regime, because he was in danger, and he knows, with a sick twist of guilt, that part of him still hesitates at the edge of outright rebellion. He still thinks about James and Lily, about the fragile safety they've carved out by keeping their heads down. Hermione understands that fear. She also resents it, because for her, there is no safe neutrality. The laws that brand her parents as vermin, the curriculum that calls her blood a flaw, those are not abstract politics. They are the air she breathes. When Harry flinches at the thought of open defiance, she hears something else underneath, that his losses are hypothetical, while hers are already happening. Their arguments are soft-voiced but fierce. In a deserted staircase, she tells him, "I don't have the luxury of waiting." In the library, he answers, "If we move too fast, we lose everything." They always end up reaching for each other's hands, but the tension lingers. A third presence at the table. Pattern interrupt. This isn't a story about a hidden, harmless school romance that somehow survives the war intact. This is a story about a relationship that becomes the war. Because from this point on, their love story cannot hide in library corners and empty classrooms. It is entangled with propaganda and policy, with foreign ministries debating whether the Dark Lord is slipping, with informants weighing whether to trust a teenage girl who reads banned texts for fun. Every stolen glance is data. Every shared smile is a potential threat. Most importantly, everyone is watching now. Allies who might reach out. Enemies who already have orders. The world has noticed that Harry and Hermione together are something more profound than a schoolyard crush. They are a crack in the Dark Lord's facade, a reminder that the prophecy he dodged did not erase the possibility of opposition. It only delayed it. So when we look at that moment in the arena, we're exploring more than a dramatic rescue. We're examining the instant their bond stops being a private comfort and becomes something worth fighting for, or destroying. And as owls cross borders, and whispers spread through taverns and ministries, one truth settles over them like another, subtler dark mark. From now on, every choice they make in love is also a move in a war the world is finally starting to see. Year 5. Dumbledore's Last Gambit. From now on, every choice they make in love is also a move in a war the world is finally starting to see. But what if the one man who understands that most clearly is the man they've been taught to admire, to distrust, and to fear disappointing all at once? Albus Dumbledore. This isn't the free, twinkling headmaster of canon sweeping into great halls with lemon drops and cryptic smiles. This is a monitored figurehead under Voldemort's regime, a legend in elegantly forged chains. There are Aurors at the staff table, ministry observers in every corridor, and wards on his office that report to the Dark Lord as much as they answer to him. He toes the line in public, signs decrees about dark arts curricula with a steady hand, and lets them call it compromise. But beneath the surface, we're exploring something more profound, a man quietly turning a captured school into the last free territory left. So how does he do it? He starts with what the Dark Lord cannot read, the future and the heart. Dumbledore still remembers every syllable of the prophecy Sybil made about the child with the power to vanquish Voldemort. He knows it never truly activated because Voldemort never marked a baby in Godric's Hollow as his equal. On parchment, the Dark Lord has won. In magic, the ledger is still open, and now he watches Harry and Hermione move through Hogwarts like a single thought split between two bodies, their bond already functioning as a unit Voldemort has no language for. Is that a risk? Absolutely. Two teenagers in love are volatile, breakable, capable of shattering if pushed too hard, but they're also something worth fighting for. When courage meets brilliance, when trauma meets relentless empathy, when two people who should have broken apart have instead chosen to hold tighter. Dumbledore, for once, decides not to wait for fate. He decides to ask. The moment comes wrapped in theater. A staged disciplinary hearing after a corridor patrol finds them near a banned passage, whispers of questioning echoing off stone. Aurors march them to his office. Portraits pretend to sleep. The door closes, locks, and then the air changes. Charms fall like invisible curtains. The monitors outside hear only raised voices and quills scratching reports. Inside, Dumbledore's eyes are very old and very clear. He does not order, he offers. He lays out the stakes in plain language Harry has never been given before. The prophecy's loophole, Voldemort's precarious victory, the thin network of professors, parents, and even a few disillusioned purebloods forming a reconstituted Order of the Phoenix in the shadows of Hogwarts itself. Join us, he says, as partners, or walk away. Keep your heads down. Try to survive quietly together. Harry's first reaction is fury. How many times will adults see his life, their love, as a strategic resource? Hermione's first reaction is terror, the precise, rational fear of losing Harry to a war he was never meant to fight. But love has taught them negotiation. They do something extraordinary. They push back, they set terms. No more half-truths. No more keeping them in the dark for their own good. If they join as equals in knowledge, if not in age. They will choose missions together. They will know who is risking them and why. This is a story about agency, about two teenagers refusing to be pawns, even in a righteous game. Dumbledore hesitates. We can almost feel the canon version of him wanting to say no, and then, slowly, he bows his head and agrees. Reluctantly, reverently, he accepts them as partners. In that quiet, charged moment, a different kind of intergenerational alliance is born, and the Second Wizarding War finally acquires its true generals. The question is, when the first real test of that alliance comes, whose terms will actually hold? Snape, between two fires, the reluctant matchmaker. The first real test comes in a dungeon classroom that smells of ash and fear, because under Voldemort's rule, Snape does not lurk at the edges of power. He stands in it. He is head of Slytherin, High Inquisitor of Hogwarts curriculum, the man entrusted to turn potions into a quiet arm of the dark arts. And yet, bound by an unbreakable vow to protect Lily's son, he walks a razor's edge. What if protecting Harry now means protecting a boy the Dark Lord has publicly spared? A living reminder that Snape begged for mercy and was, in a way, obeyed. This isn't a story about a simple double agent. It's about a man who has to look at James and Lily alive in the Great Hall, watch Harry at the Slytherin table with a dark mark on his timetable, and know that his guilt has been twisted into a permanent breathing punishment. Voldemort won, the prophecy went dormant, and Snape's bargains saved lives, but at a cost that never stops collecting. Into that equation walks Hermione Granger, forged papers declaring her a half-blood, a forged history that Snape, with a flick of his quill, quietly sustains. On the surface, he files her with every other insufferable know-it-all, her hand always up, her essays painfully thorough, her corrections precise. But he also sees the way she flinches at slurs, the way she memorizes new decrees about blood verification, as if cataloging her own future trial. So, once, when a Caro requests her file for random inspection, the parchment that arrives on the inquisitorial desk bears Snape's cold signature and a slightly altered parentage. No one ever knows how close she came. We're exploring the moment that calculation becomes something more profound. It happens during a dark arts practical, thinly disguised as defense. A cursed flame serpent controlled by Snape, weaving between desks, Voldemort's observers in the back row, masks lowered but eyes sharp. When the serpent lunges too close to Hermione, Harry moves before he thinks. His wand is up, his body between her and the fire, his voice cracking on a shield charm he has not yet been authorized to know. The serpent shatters against his magic. Hermione's hand fists in the back of his robe. For a heartbeat, they are pressed together, breathing the same scorched air. Snape sees everything. The way Harry's eyes check Hermione's face before he checks his own burned sleeve. The way Hermione's fingers tremble, not from fear of the flame, but at the thought of losing him. The way they both, almost in unison, remember to look afraid of Snape a second too late. Attachments are liabilities. He has said it for years, lived it longer. Love made him beg to Voldemort. Love chained him to Dumbledore's impossible conditions. And now, in this warped canon where the Dark Lord sits on the throne and Dumbledore is a prisoner rather than a puppet master, love between two students could get them both killed. So what does he do? Crush it, as he was never allowed to crush his own, or recognize, against every bitter instinct, that their bond might be the one variable Voldemort has not accounted for. That night, a report crosses his desk. Potter used unauthorized defensive magic. Granger incited disruption. One signed parchment could place them under direct ministry scrutiny. Instead, Snape dips his quill, hesitates, and writes, Flame Serpent exceeded parameters. Instructor error. No disciplinary action. Most importantly, he does not stop there. The next lesson, when the classroom has emptied and the torches burn low, he calls them back. No witnesses, no masks. Just 3 people who have all, in different ways, loved in wartime. We'll examine, he says softly, a shield charm you are not yet ready for. You will not speak of this to anyone, ever. Harry and Hermione exchange a look that is almost a vow, and as Snape watches them stand together, wands raised side by side, he realizes he has just chosen a side far more dangerous than Dumbledore's. The question is, when Voldemort notices that choice, who will pay the price first? The underground classroom. Training for a war they didn't start. The underground classroom is not on any map of Hogwarts. It lives beneath it, down a staircase that pretends not to exist, through a stretch of wall that eats sound, in a sub-basement Dumbledore carved out of the rock itself and wrapped in wards so dense they feel like pressure on the skin. Here, dark magic doesn't ping on Voldemort's detection webs. Defensive magic doesn't shimmer on his sensors. Here, intent is blurred, signatures are muffled, and every spell is swallowed before it can echo upward to the new headmaster's spies. This isn't a story about cozy lessons and house points. This is a story about 2 teenagers being sharpened into weapons in a room that smells of stone, spell smoke, and fear. We're exploring what it means when your classroom is also your war room. Dumbledore stands at one end, Snape at the other, and between them Harry and Hermione move, not like students, like duelists. Wands flick, wrists snap, but their lips don't move. Silent casting, over and over, until Hermione's hand trembles and Harry's voice is hoarse from the spells he's not allowed to speak. Stunners, shields, bone breakers, counter curses that never made it into any canon textbook. Again, Snape says, and a red curse scythes toward Hermione with deliberate cruelty. Harry is moving before he thinks, shield blooming in front of her, their magic colliding, twisting, then stabilizing as one plane of shimmering light. They don't even look at each other. They don't have to. That's the point. Because what if love isn't the weakness Voldemort thinks it is, but the reason Harry already knows Hermione will cut left when he steps right, that she'll shield high when he drops low? In duels, they orbit each other, covering blind spots, trading roles without words. She disarms, he binds, she feints, he finishes. When Dumbledore forces them to switch, to think like Aurors one lesson and Death Eaters the next, it's Hermione who sketches out the ambush patterns. Harry who sees where frightened first years will actually run. Sometimes they fight, fiercely. Hermione refuses to let him volunteer as bait in one scenario. Harry snaps when she suggests using herself as the obvious Muggle-born target. The argument isn't about strategy, it's about terror. Terror of watching the person you love walk into the line of fire you were supposed to take. The pattern interrupt comes on a night when everything goes too far. Snape lowers Dumbledore's occlumency shields into something brutal and raw. Again, he orders, and Harry slams into Hermione's mind, then she into his, over and over until their memories blur. Privet Drive, Cokeworth, ministry raids, her parents' erased faces, his parents' empty house. When Dumbledore finally calls a halt, Hermione is still standing. She just folds, not from pain, from understanding. "This is what we're being made into," she whispers, shoulders shaking. "Weapons. They want us to be able to hurt each other if we have to." Harry crosses the distance before Dumbledore can move. He wraps his arms around her, feels her fists knot in his robes, like she's anchoring herself to something more profound than duty. For a moment, the war falls away. There is only breath and heartbeat and the quiet, devastating relief of not being alone in the dark. Most importantly, they don't let go when Snape clears his throat. The next lesson, Dumbledore raises the stakes. A paired shield, he says, old and complex, designed for bonded casters, dangerous to attempt. Together, he instructs softly. They exchange a glance that is almost a spell by itself. Protego Dworum, they breathe as one. Their magic surges, collides, then locks. A dome of blue-white light flares out from them, flawless, humming with shared intent. Snape's test curse shatters against it like glass against steel. For the first time in weeks, Dumbledore's eyes actually shine. Snape and Dumbledore share a look that isn't quite relief, isn't quite fear. It's hope. Bare, fragile, and very real. Harry and Hermione feel it too. The exhaustion, the bruises, the arguments, they haven't broken them. They've forged a bond that Voldemort has no language for. Together, they might actually stand a chance. The question is, when that chance finally comes, what will it cost them to take it? Year 6. Temptation, sacrifice, and the cost of knowing too much. That fragile hope becomes dangerous in year 6 because for the first time, the Dark Lord doesn't just want to crush Harry, he wants to claim him. What if power itself starts whispering that it can keep the people you love alive? Voldemort's regime promotes Harry publicly now, the orphan who proved his loyalty at Hogwarts, the boy who survived raids and interrogations and still comes back to class. He's offered a protected apprenticeship under Snape, access to restricted libraries, a safe house for his parents, on one condition: he must denounce reckless dissent and pledge that he will not associate with known agitators. Everyone understands who that means. Hermione, meanwhile, is offered something that would have thrilled her in any other timeline: a personal commendation from the new curriculum board, permission to design advanced arithmancy modules to assist in research on bloodline magic. Academic advancement, a fast track into the ministry's intellectual elite, if she agrees to share her findings and keep her questions carefully within approved boundaries. On paper, it's safety. In practice, it is complicity. This isn't a story about easy refusals and heroic speeches. This is a story about two teenagers sitting in the quiet corners of a corrupted castle, asking each other, again and again, how much can we bend without breaking? Harry looks at the offer and thinks, brutally, that if he steps into Voldemort's light, he can drag attention away from Hermione. If he is useful, visible, loyal, then maybe the regime will hesitate before touching the Muggle-born girl who walks at his side. Hermione looks at her offer and sees access, files, experiments, names. The chance to actually see how the machine works from the inside. Isn't that what Dumbledore has always wanted from his spies? Isn't information something worth fighting for? So when they fight, it is not over jealousy or who spends time with whom. It's over whether Harry is allowed to sacrifice his own soul in the name of shielding her, and whether Hermione is allowed to walk willingly into a role that will require her to smile, politely, at murderers. We're exploring the ethics of survival here, not in theory, but in the way Harry's voice cracks when he says, "If they think I'm with them, they'll leave you alone." And Hermione fires back, "I will not be your excuse to wear their colors." Their love complicates everything. They cannot pretend their choices fall only on their own shoulders. When Hermione imagines taking that research post, she doesn't see prestige. She sees Harry's face if he has to duel someone she trained. When Harry imagines standing beside Snape in official robes, he doesn't see power. He sees Hermione in the crowd, wondering which version of him is real. And yet, that same connection clarifies what they actually believe. Together, in whispered arguments that last until dawn, they finally name their lines. No public denunciations. No work that directly targets Muggleborns. No torture. No oaths on Voldemort's name. No lies that cannot someday be untangled in the light. Most importantly, they decide that neither of them gets to be martyr and savior while the other watches. Leadership in this dark canon is not Harry charging ahead or Hermione sacrificing herself on the altar of knowledge. It is both of them choosing, consciously, how to fight and how not to fight. This year is their crucible, the moment they stop being children pushed around the board and start becoming the kind of leaders who understand that sometimes the bravest word is no, even when yes would keep them safe. And the next time Voldemort reaches out his hand, they will already know which part of themselves they refuse to trade, no matter the cost. The Horcrux revelation, in a world already broken. So when the truth finally comes, it doesn't arrive in a blaze of prophecy or a grand speech. It arrives in a dungeon office, in Snape's voice, flat and exhausted, like a man peeling back his own skin. We're exploring the moment the missing piece drops into place, why Voldemort has been so impossibly hard to kill, why every whispered assassination plot ends with, but what if it doesn't take? Snape doesn't call them Horcruxes at first. He calls them contingencies, anchors, the Dark Lord's insurance against the fate that swallowed Grindelwald. Only when Harry refuses to look away, when Hermione quietly says, "Name them," does he actually speak the word, Horcruxes. It lands like a physical blow. This isn't a story about clever plot devices. This is a story about a man who carved his soul into pieces and hid them like landmines across a broken world. And in this timeline, where Voldemort already won the First War, the revelation feels less like a twist and more like confirmation of their worst fear. Of course he planned for this. Of course he never meant to die. Snape's reluctant confession is stitched together with fragments Dumbledore smuggled out before Azkaban, and a half-burned dossier Sirius pushed through the flue the night he was taken. A ring that poisoned Dumbledore. A diary that possessed a girl. A locket that drove good wizards mad. Suddenly, the pattern is undeniable. We'll examine how, in one night, Voldemort stops being an invincible tyrant and becomes something even more terrifying, a solvable equation with far too many unknowns. Harry and Hermione's reaction is a collision of horror and relief. Horror at the sheer depravity, murder as a ritual, love as a weakness to be cut away. Relief because, for the first time, the war has a concrete shape. There is a list, however incomplete. Objects to find, curses to break, a sequence of impossible tasks that, if completed, might actually end him. But tactically, everything changes. They can't just dream of one perfect strike, one glorious coup at the Ministry, or a desperate duel in the Great Hall. To win now means a long, careful campaign of artifact hunting under the nose of a dictator who controls Hogwarts, the Aurors, the press. Every Hogsmeade weekend becomes reconnaissance. Every trip to the library doubles as research into obscure magical heirlooms and cursed protections. How do you track a diary that might already be ash, a cup buried in a vault, a snake that never leaves its master's side? Most importantly, the revelation forces them to think in years, not months. This isn't a short rebellion. It's a second wizarding war, waged in whispers and stolen hours. Harry looks at Hermione and realizes that if they keep fighting, their love won't be a brief, tragic blaze. It will have to survive boredom and terror, false leads and funerals, the weight of waking up every day, knowing they're still not done. So they make a quiet pact. They're in the half-light of Snape's office. No more secrets. No more running off alone to play martyr. No more unilateral sacrifices dressed up as heroism. Every Horcrux they face together. Every risk argued through. Every mission shared. Because if Voldemort has turned his soul into something fractured and less than human, then their answer has to be something more profound. A bond that refuses to break. A love that insists on being whole. And as Snape, hand-shaking, sketches the outline of one particular Horcrux on the parchment between them, we have to ask, what happens when the next piece of Voldemort's soul is hidden in the one place Harry never wanted to look? Ron's breaking point, loyalty, envy, and walking away. For a long moment after Snape's revelation, the room is silent. Then another truth, less mystical than Horcruxes and prophecies but just as explosive, finally surfaces: the way this war is breaking Ron Weasley. Because what if the next battlefield isn't a cursed object, but the space between three friends who were supposed to stand together? What if the cost of resistance isn't just blood and danger, but the slow erosion of trust when love and fear pull in different directions? Ron's breaking point doesn't arrive in a single dramatic outburst. It builds. It builds every time Harry and Hermione lean over a map, shoulders touching, finishing each other's tactical sentences while he hovers at the edge, waiting to be brought in. It builds with every whispered strategy session in Grimmauld Place, where Snape's intel is shared with the core team, and somehow, Ron walks away feeling like an afterthought rather than an equal. And it builds most painfully each time an Order contact brings news from the outside. Another raid, another family questioned, another Weasley cousin dragged in for interrogation because the regime knows exactly which blood traitors to squeeze. When Voldemort wins the First War, the Weasleys don't just risk disgrace, they risk eradication. Ron lies awake, imagining his mum hauled before a Death Eater tribunal, his dad on his knees at Malfoy's boots, Ginny branded for insubordination. Harry hears mission, Ron hears funeral. The confrontation comes in a cramped safe-house kitchen, late, after one more plan that involves Harry walking straight toward a rumored Horcrux with Hermione at his side, and Ron assigned to cover the escape route. One phrase too many, one exclusion too far. "So that's it?" Ron snaps, voice shaking. "You two charge in hand, and I wait outside like some backup act? Do you even hear yourselves?" Harry bristles. "Ron, it's not like that. We just..." "No," Ron cuts across him, and this time, he doesn't back down. "You just decide. Together. You always decide together. You look at each other, and suddenly the rest of us are background. You talk about Horcruxes and prophecies and necessary risks, like you're the only ones who have something worth fighting for." Pattern interrupt. He doesn't say, "I'm jealous." He says something worse. "You dragged me into a war I never actually chose. You had a prophecy, Harry. Hermione had a target on her back the minute she got her letter. Me, I had a family. I still do. And every time you two make one of your heroic plans, their odds get worse." The words land because there's truth in them. This isn't a story about a coward walking away. This is a story about an ordinary person realizing that extraordinary sacrifice is not a universal obligation. Hermione's eyes flash, hurt and furious. "You think we don't care about your family? Ron, if we stop now, Voldemort doesn't spare the Weasleys. He parades them. He makes examples of them." Harry, defensive, throws back. "We're all in danger. I never asked you to." "Yes, you did," Ron says quietly now. "Every time you looked at me like I'd betrayed you for wanting something normal. Every time you and Hermione decided the only future worth having was the one where you both die trying." Here, the fault lines crack open. Harry imagines a future only in terms of victory or death beside Hermione. Hermione imagines rebuilding the world with Harry, rebuilding Hogwarts, rewriting the very curriculum Voldemort poisoned. Ron imagines, with desperate clarity, his mother alive long enough to see peace at all. In this darker timeline, he doesn't wait for a cursed locket to push him over the edge. He leaves earlier, decisively. He tells them he has to go to his family, to pull them deeper underground, to stop being the weak link the regime can exploit. He walks out not with slammed doors, but with the lingering look back that hurts more, because love is still there. The bond is still there, but his choice is different. Most importantly, his arc reminds us that resistance has a price that not everyone can pay in the same currency. Harry and Hermione choose the cause above all else, above safety, above anything but each other. Ron chooses blood, home, the fragile hope that survival itself can be something more profound. And as the door closes behind him, we're exploring a new kind of emptiness in their little war room, an absence that will haunt every plan they make from here on out. Year 7. Hogwarts under siege, hearts under fire. The emptiness Ron leaves behind doesn't stay quiet for long. By September, it's echoing with screams. Hogwarts finally stops pretending. What if the Carrow's reign from canon wasn't a shocking detour, but the default setting of Harry's entire 7th year? No pink cardigans, no ministry oversight, no illusion of safety. Under Headmaster Snape and the Dark Lord's open control, the castle becomes exactly what Voldemort needs. A fortress, a factory, a cage. Classrooms are refitted into dueling pits and interrogation rooms. The defense against the dark arts corridor is lined with shackles for demonstrations. Muggle studies is no longer a joke. It's compulsory indoctrination, a weekly reminder that Hermione's very blood is a crime. The Forbidden Forest bristles with wards and patrols, not to keep students out, but to keep captured dissenters in. Detention doesn't mean lines, it means curses. This isn't a story about a school year. This is a story about an occupied territory where children are drafted as either enforcers or examples, and in the middle of it, Harry and Hermione step into roles they never actually wanted, but can no longer refuse. Without Dumbledore, without an order, without Ron's easy laughter to soften the edges, they become the de facto leaders of an underground student resistance. We're exploring a Hogwarts where DA doesn't stand for a club, it stands for a cell. Harry teaches shield charms in abandoned classrooms at midnight, then blows a secret passage the next night to disrupt a Death Eater supply run. Hermione codes messages into homework essays, rigs enchanted coins to track patrol routes, and organizes safe houses inside the castle itself. Old elf quarters, hidden attics, the forgotten space above the Great Hall. They smuggle first years out of Carrow detentions. They swap wands for confiscated Muggleborns. They sabotage dark arts lessons so hexes misfire, so the cruelty doesn't land quite as cleanly as the Carrows intend. But every act of defiance has a price. Sleep becomes a luxury. Bruises bloom under school robes. Harry's shoulder never fully heals from a curse he took shielding a second year. Hermione's hands shake when she writes, nerves frayed by too many Cruciatus echoes. They send friends, Neville, Ginny, Luna, on missions that might not have returns, and then lie awake counting the minutes until those faces reappear, or don't. Most importantly, their love stops being a secret refuge and starts feeling like a fault line. The breaking point comes on a night that should have been a victory. They've planned for weeks to intercept a transfer of prisoners through the Forbidden Forest. Muggleborns bound for a research wing in Normangard. The plan is elegant, almost beautiful. Time distractions, Patronus relays, a diversionary explosion near Hagrid's hut. It unravels in seconds. A traitor in their ranks, a prefect who breaks under Carrow torture and gives up half the route. The ambush collapses into chaos, green light flashes far too close, and Harry only survives because Hermione physically shoves him behind a fallen tree, taking a slicing curse across her ribs that should have been his. In the aftermath, back in their warded room, the argument isn't cinematic. It's raw, ugly, necessary. "If I hadn't been there," she says, voice hoarse, "you would have stood your ground and died. You can't keep doing that, Harry, not when they all need you." "And what if you hadn't been there?" he fires back. "What if loving you means I keep choosing you over them? Over the mission?" That's the knife edge they're walking now. When courage meets calculation, when leadership meets attachment, when two people who would always die for each other have to decide if they can live for everyone else. We'll examine this year as their crucible. Every raid, every whispered plan, every night spent holding each other while listening for footsteps in the corridor hammers their bond into something harder, or cracks it further, because under Voldemort's flag, Hogwarts is no longer a place you pass through on the way to adulthood. It's the battlefield where Harry and Hermione must decide whether their love is a liability in war, or something worth fighting for that can actually survive it. The spark, turning Voldemort's spectacle against him. So what happens when that battlefield is dressed up as a celebration, when the war you've been quietly fighting in corridors and common rooms is dragged under chandeliers and gilded arches and called peace? The day Voldemort chooses is the 10th anniversary of his restoration. Hogwarts and the Ministry are linked by a lattice of enchanted mirrors, broadcasting one unified spectacle across Britain. In the Great Hall, the house tables are gone, replaced by a single raised platform facing a floating dark mark woven of silver fire. Banners of the new curriculum hang from the rafters. Discipline, purity, order. Every student, every surviving teacher, every Ministry official is under orders to attend. No one is allowed to look away. This isn't a story about a quiet, hidden rebellion anymore. This is a story about what happens when the propaganda machine becomes the stage for its own unmasking. We're exploring a Hogwarts that has been rewritten into a dark arts academy, and now it's being used as a set. Carved into the walls, in place of the old House Point's hourglasses, are crystal projectors tied directly to the mirrors in Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade. In every major wizarding town, Voldemort will speak from the Ministry atrium. His image will bloom above the staff table. The message is simple. The children are loyal, the Muggleborns are contained, the future is secure, unless someone writes a different script. Harry and Hermione have spent months doing precisely that. While other students memorized bloodline charts, they memorized the timing of patrols, the breathing pattern of the castle's wards. Hermione, working from banned arithmancy texts and scraps of Dumbledore's notes smuggled out by Snape, has found a way to lace a contagion into the projection network, a spell that, at the right moment, will hijack every mirror, every crystal, every enchanted surface. Harry's job is simpler and infinitely harder. Survive long enough, in the center of the hall, to speak. Most importantly, they both understand the cost. Once those images go out, Horcruxes exposed, atrocities laid bare, the truth that the prophecy didn't fail so much as stall, there is no going back to anonymity. No more pretending to be just another marked orphan and just another Muggle-born girl who keeps her head down. So in an empty classroom before the ceremony, wands laid between them on a desk scarred by decades of canon charms lessons, they steal a moment. Hermione's hands shake as she adjusts his collar. Harry's thumb finds the inside of her wrist, feeling the frantic pulse. They don't promise they'll be fine. They promise something more profound, that whatever happens in the hall, whatever happens to their bodies, the bond they've forged in whispered plans and stolen kisses will not be used to break them. Together, he says. Always, she answers, and for once, it isn't romantic hyperbole, it's strategy. Then, the ceremony begins. Voldemort's face swells above the staff table, pale and inhuman, his voice echoing from every wall, a litany of victories, of traitors crushed, of peace achieved. But as he raises his wand in the atrium, Hermione whispers the final arithmantic syllable, and the dark mark above the hall flickers. Pattern interrupt. The silver skull spasms, then fractures into images no one was meant to see. A Muggle-born girl screaming under the Cruciatus in a ministry basement, giants trampling a burning village, a diary bleeding ink as a little red-haired girl collapses. We'll examine the horror later. For now, we stay in the chaos. Students surge to their feet, some scream, some cheer, some raise wands at their own classmates. The staff divides in a heartbeat, McGonagall's spell shattering a Death Eater's shield, Snape frozen between instinct and allegiance. Wards around the doors stutter as the contagion spell overloads them, corridors beyond erupting with detonations from other rebel cells. In the center of the hall, Harry and Hermione stand back to back, movements as synchronized as all those clandestine DA sessions made real. Her stunner drops a Slytherin prefect, aiming at Harry's spine. His shield charm swallows a curse streaking toward her heart. Around them, the narrative is literally coming apart, Voldemort's projected face distorting as the hijacked feed cycles through his own murders, his own Horcruxes, each one briefly labeled by Hermione's precise, merciless script. What if every witch and wizard in Britain learns, in the same breath, that their immortal lord can be killed? Voldemort feels it. In the atrium, in the hall, through every mark he's burned into skin, he feels control slipping. His eyes, on 100 mirrored surfaces, widen. Not in fear, not yet, but in something dangerously close to surprise. And over the screams, over the crack of spells and the collapsing wards, Harry's voice rides the hijacked magic, amplified through every crystal and mirror. My name is Harry Potter, he says, looking straight up into Voldemort's fractured image. And he's lied to you about everything. The feed holds on his face, on Hermione's silhouette at his back, just long enough for the entire country to see them, and then the first killing curse of the uprising streaks toward the platform. We don't see who it hits. Snape's final move, and Dumbledore's last sacrifice. The curse hits something behind them. The platform erupts into green and gold and screaming, and for a heartbeat the whole world becomes light, and in that light, we finally see Dumbledore's endgame. What if the old man who seemed to be losing for an entire generation had actually been playing for this exact moment? For years in this timeline, Dumbledore has known that prophecy has gone quiet, that canon's neat, neither can live clause never truly activated. So he builds something else, not a weapon in Harry's scar, but a failsafe in his own death, wards braided into his life force, charms that only trigger when his heart stops, a promise that if Voldemort ever lets him die publicly, the lie of the Dark Lord's invincibility will crack. The first killing curse slams toward the raised broadcasting tower. Dumbledore is already moving. He steps between Harry and the spell, not with the serenity of an old man ready to go, but with the ferocity of a general who has waited decades to spring his trap. The curse hits. His chest blooms green, and the sky breaks. Every crystal, every mirror Voldemort used to project his face now shows Dumbledore instead. His lined features, his blood on his robes, his eyes still impossibly clear. His voice, amplified through the same network, rolls out over Britain. He is not immortal, Dumbledore says, even as he's falling. His soul is broken. His Horcruxes can be destroyed. Remember that, and remember who stands against him. Then the real pattern interrupt. The ground itself answers. The tower's foundations, keyed to Dumbledore's life, rip apart as his pulse fades. Stone shears away, collapsing a whole flank of the battlefield, swallowing a ring of Death Eaters, and, crucially, one of Voldemort's hidden anchors. The cursed obelisk that has been quietly housing a fragment of his soul beneath the Ministry Plaza. In one impossible moment, a Horcrux shatters, and the Dark Lord's image flickers, panics, distorts. Snape feels it like a knife through his mark. He's close enough to see Harry and Hermione thrown by the blast, close enough to hear Voldemort's voice in his mind, cold and imperious. Finish it. Kill the girl. Break him. This is the order he has always feared. The one line he has always prayed he would never be forced to cross. For years, we've watched him balance on that razor's edge, performing devotion, leaking secrets, preserving the one Muggle-born who keeps the boy from collapsing. Now there is no clever half-measure left. No way to aim a curse a few inches wide and call it an accident. Snape raises his wand and turns. The first spell he casts is not at Hermione, but at the Death Eater beside him. Bone shatters. Masks fly. In the chaos of falling stone and failing illusions, Snape finally does the unforgivable. He makes his trees invisible, shielding Harry, covering Hermione, snarling counter-curses at men he has called comrades for 20 years. Harry sees Dumbledore fall. Hermione feels Snape's shield slam into place around them, hears him hiss, "Run, you idiots!" With something almost like love buried under the hatred. They don't want to run. They are furious at being protected yet again, at legacies written in other people's blood. But most importantly, this isn't a story about two teenagers watching their elders die for them. This is a story about what they do with those deaths. James and Lily's compromise lives in Harry, the belief that you can bend without breaking, that survival is something worth fighting for. Dumbledore's idealism burns in Hermione, the conviction that ideas, once spoken aloud to the whole world, can never be fully silenced. Snape's bitter love binds them together, a reminder that devotion can be ugly, complicated, still real. As the tower collapses and Voldemort's scream echoes through every broken mirror, Harry and Hermione drag themselves to their feet, bruised, grieving, holding hands. They are the only ones left who can decide how these three legacies end, and next, we'll examine what it actually means for them to lead a war that no prophecy ever promised they would win. The final hunt, Horcruxes, heartbreak, and hard choices. The tower dust is still in their lungs when the hunt truly begins. What if this is the cruelest irony of all, that only after tearing down Dumbledore and Snape and the last fragile scaffolding of the Old Order, do Harry and Hermione finally hold the full map of Voldemort's soul in their hands? We're exploring the phase of the war, where the enemy isn't just a snake-faced tyrant on a throne. It's time, it's distance. It's the way grief slows your wand hand. The diary and ring are legends from a different timeline. In this world, the Horcruxes that remain are sharper, more guarded, almost spiteful. There is the locket, still twisted around the neck of a reinforced and furious regent at the flooded ruins of the old Ministry Records office. There is the cup, not in Bellatrix's vault, but entombed beneath Hogwarts itself, in a repurposed chamber of secrets turned dark arts reliquary. There is Nagini, always coiled near Voldemort's throne in the Black Tower that replaced Azkaban, and there is one more, a blackened shard of diadem, hidden in the shattered Astronomy Tower, where Dumbledore once fell in canon, because Voldemort, in his arrogance, remade that fall as a monument to himself. Each retrieval becomes a mini-war. To reach the locket, they lead a raid through drowned corridors, where records of every Muggle-born cleansing float like accusations. To claim the cup, they fight not just curses, but twisted echoes of old school days, charmed suits of armor wearing the faces of dead professors, portraits that scream for mercy and then attack. This isn't a story about clever puzzles in safe, isolated caves. This is a story about breaking into the heart of a regime and setting it on fire, one fragment at a time, and the hunt changes them. Harry learns to stun first and ask questions never, because questions cost seconds, and seconds cost lives. Hermione starts drafting contingency plans that assume half their number will not return. They still save who they can, but the faces of those they couldn't save line up behind their eyelids at night. A muggle-born child in a knockdown tenement, a squib safe housekeeper who opened the door 2 seconds too late. The most brutally personal cost comes with the diadem shard. The astronomy tower is a fortress now, ringed in dementors and patrolled by Death Eater trainees in black school robes. Ron insists on leading the diversion because this was always where he left and came back in canon, and he is tired of being the one who runs. They time it perfectly, almost. Harry and Hermione reach the shrine at the tower's peak, shatter the cursed diadem with fiendfire that nearly takes them too, and feel that nauseating lurch as a piece of Voldemort dies. But below, the diversion collapses. The safe house that launched the mission is traced. When they stagger back through the flue, smoke is already pouring from the windows, and the Weasley clock in the corner is frozen with 3 hands on mortal peril that will never move again. The victory feels hollow, obscene. Ron's voice is raw as he screams that no Horcrux is worth a family, that they're turning into the thing they're fighting. Hermione screams back that if they stop now, every family left will burn. Harry, caught between them, hears himself say the thing he never wanted to admit, that sometimes there is no choice that doesn't kill someone. Their bond, which once felt like something pure, something worth fighting for in itself, becomes strained under the weight of triage. They argue in whispers over maps. Is it acceptable to leak false intel that will draw Death Eaters into a Muggle neighborhood if it means access to Nagini later? Are they still fighting for a future they want to live in together, or just trying to end a nightmare at any cost? How many more names can they carry before love buckles under the load? And yet, they keep moving, because what if the only thing more terrifying than losing themselves is letting Voldemort remain immortal? When the penultimate Horcrux falls, Nagini, beheaded in a brutal close-quarters skirmish in the ruins of Godric's Hollow, the place where this war was supposed to start and end in another life. They stand over her twitching body, both of them spattered with venom and ash. The world does not change. The sky does not brighten, but the air feels thinner, as if the story itself has run out of places to hide. Most importantly, they realize something that freezes them more than any Dementor could. There are no more decoys left, no more secrets to chase. The last Horcrux is the man himself, enthroned in the Black Tower with a nation at his back. The final confrontation is no longer a distant theoretical. It is imminent, it is unavoidable, and it will demand from their love, from their connection, a price that even they have not yet dared to calculate. The Last Stand, facing the Dark Lord. They grew up under the battlefield is not a distant wasteland, or some anonymous field. It is the place where the lie began. Godric's Hollow is unrecognizable. The cottage where James and Lily were meant to die is a blackened shell, the village square scorched by decades of dark marks hanging overhead, the churchyard torn open by careless resurrection rituals. This is where, in canon, everything ended for Harry before it began. Here, under Voldemort's reign, everything has been twisted into an arena, a stage, a message. He waits for them at the center of the ruined street, robes billowing like smoke, wand loose in his hand. No theatrics now, no need. The Black Tower has fallen. The Ministry is in flames. Hogwarts has cast off its chains. The nation he thought he owned holds its breath. And this time, he is not facing a baby or a boy. He is facing what he accidentally forged. What if the Dark Lord's greatest mistake was letting his enemies grow up inside his world, letting Harry learn fear and obedience in his classrooms, only to discover the cracks, letting Hermione study his revised curriculum so thoroughly that she could map every omission, every weakness, every spell he banned because he feared it might undo him? We're exploring a confrontation where he finally understands that these two are not anomalies. They are the product of his own regime, turned against him. Harry carries years of enforced dueling practice, Auror drills twisted into rebellion. Hermione carries a mind sharpened by surviving Muggle-born purges, by memorizing every line of law he rewrote to erase her. The duel begins without a signal. Green light arcs toward them. They separate like they have trained 100 times in secret tunnels under Hogwarts. Harry meets Curse with raw, violent power, his shield slamming into Voldemort's spell so hard the cobblestones crack. Hermione doesn't block. She redirects, catching the spill of magic and snapping it sideways into a transfiguration trap that turns shattered stone into grasping chains. For a breath, he is surprised. That is their opening. They move together, always together, their bond almost visible in the air between them. When Harry attacks, Hermione is already there, layering silent hexes through the gaps in his power. When Hermione faints, Harry reads the tilt of her shoulder and drives in, their magic interweaving, red and gold and white against sickly green. This isn't a story about a boy chosen by prophecy stumbling into victory. This is a story about two people who chose each other again and again under the worst possible sky and built a new prophecy out of sheer refusal to break. So of course Voldemort reaches for the one weapon he understands, love as leverage. He pins Hermione with a wordless curse, forces her to her knees, turns to Harry with that serpentine calm, a bargain, almost identical to the one he once offered James and Lily in that house that never fell. Serve, submit, watch her live while the world stays chained. What would you do if the person you loved most in the world was used as a blade against you? If surrender looked, for one shattering second, like mercy? Harry's magic surges wild, but Hermione meets his eyes first. No pleading, no panic, just that same fierce, steady connection we've watched grow from whispered plans in dormitories to kisses stolen behind war room doors. She shakes her head, just once. Trust me. Together, they refuse the script. Hermione uses the very curse holding her as an anchor, siphoning its structure, unraveling it from the inside, while Harry drops his wand, deliberately, drawing Voldemort close enough for the protections woven into his blood, into their shared sacrificial choices to flare. What if love, freely chosen in a world built on fear, is actually the oldest magic of all? Voldemort's defeat is not a single flash of light, it is a cascade. Horcruxes already destroyed. Snape's double game already played, Dumbledore's last gambit already spent. When their combined spell work finally hits, it is less a collision and more a verdict. The dark mark over Godric's Hollow flickers, then thins, then tears apart like smoke in a hard wind, and as the world watches that symbol fade, as Harry and Hermione stand shaking in the ruins, where his story was meant to end before it began, one question hangs heavy in the charged silence between them. If the war is finally over, what price will their love be asked to pay next? Aftermath. Building a world worth surviving, for the dark mark dissolves, but the world does not neatly follow it into nothing. In the days after Godric's Hollow, peace is not a sunrise, it's a power cut. The Dark Lord falls, and suddenly every ward, every chain, every whispered order that held this twisted society together snaps at once. Aurors and rebels pour into the ministry, only to find entire departments leaderless, records burned, cells full. Death Eaters apparate away in blind panic. Others try to apparate into the new order, all wide eyes and trembling hands, insisting they were only following orders. And on the edges, in alleys and ruined villages, revenge blooms. Fast, ugly, dangerous. We're exploring a moment where victory actually makes everything more precarious. Old Order loyalists hunt down known torturers. Pure-blood families settle ancient scores under the convenient banner of justice. Muggleborns, freed from registries and camps, arm themselves with confiscated wands, ready to strike first before anyone can ever collar them again. What if the world Harry and Hermione saved tears itself apart, before it can even remember what normal felt like? They walk into this chaos as heroes, and they hate it. Harry can't cross a corridor in the shattered ministry without someone reaching for him, blessing him, pressing a baby into his arms like he's a talisman against the past. Hermione can't finish a sentence in a planning meeting without senior witches and wizards turning to her with the wary respect once reserved for Dumbledore. In canon, they're too young to run the world. Here, the world is too broken to care. But they both know exactly how a frightened society creates its next tyrant. When captured Death Eaters are dragged into the atrium, there's a moment where the crowd wants blood. No wands, no trials. Just a public unmasking and a fall from the shattered golden fountain. Harry feels the pull. He remembers names, screams, green light. Hermione feels it too, and steps forward anyway, voice hoarse, insisting on trials, on evidence, on the difference between branded killers and terrified functionaries mercenaries, who signed what they were told to sign. This isn't a story about mercy for monsters. This is a story about refusing to let justice become a prettier word for revenge. So they argue for a rebuilt Wizengamot with Muggle-born seats, for a truth commission to record what happened under Voldemort's regime, for sentencing that distinguishes between ideology and survival. Hermione spends long nights drafting frameworks to dismantle blood laws, to protect Muggle-borns without turning them into a new elite that pure-blood children will quietly grow to hate. Most importantly, she demands that Hogwarts be remade from the ground up, dark arts stripped out, history of magic rewritten to include the camps, the purges, the quiet resistance. Harry, who once only wanted to be an Auror, finds himself designing an Auror office that answers to more than one person. They disagree. A lot. Hermione wants blanket amnesty for underage collaborators. Harry wants a line drawn at certain names and certain crimes. He pushes for harsher security around known sympathizers. She warns that permanent surveillance will only teach a new generation that privacy is treason. Their bond, once forged in survival, now has to withstand policy memos and midnight arguments that end not in kisses, but in exhausted silence. And here's the pattern interrupt. For the first time since they were 11, there are empty hours. No missions, no secret meetings. Just mornings where Hermione makes tea in a borrowed kitchen, and Harry stares at the sunlight on the table like he doesn't quite trust it. They have to relearn how to be together when every moment isn't a crisis, how to touch without checking for wounds, how to sleep without counting exits. What if the hardest part of their love story isn't surviving the Dark Lord, but surviving the quiet? Because peace, they discover, is not the absence of fear, it's the presence of choices. And for two people who have always been told what the prophecy, what the war, what the world needs from them, learning how to choose a life, together, deliberately, imperfectly, might be the most extraordinary and most dangerous rebellion yet. The war is over. Now they have to decide what and who they're willing to live for. And as we'll examine next, peace has its own kind of battlefield. Love without the war. Who are Harry and Hermione now? Peace, when it finally comes, does not feel peaceful. For Harry and Hermione, the dark mark over the Ministry is gone. The regime has fallen. The second Wizarding War they were never meant to fight is over. So what if the question now is not how to survive the night, but how to live the morning after? This isn't a story about two perfect heroes riding off into a cannon sunset. This is a story about two exhausted 20-somethings in a cramped London flat, arguing over whether the sofa should face the fireplace or the window, and both of them realizing, halfway through, that they have no idea who they are when they're not planning someone's downfall. Harry has always been the marked boy, the weapon Dumbledore sharpened in secret while Voldemort ruled. In the Resistance, he knew his role: infiltrate, inspire, endure. Now, he wakes up, and there is no mission briefing, no coded owl, just Hermione's hair on his pillow, and a kettle that actually whistles instead of exploding. Who is he if he isn't the one who walks into the worst of it first? Hermione, too, is unmoored. She was the strategist of the Underground, the Muggle-born girl who turned propaganda pamphlets into battle plans, who mapped the corridors of a dark arts Hogwarts and the weak points of Death Eater patrols with the same meticulous hand, without curfews to dodge and raids to anticipate. What do you do with a mind trained to see every hallway as an ambush route? We're exploring a different kind of battlefield now. The kitchen table, at 2 a.m., parchment spread out not with maps of the Ministry, but with job offers. Hermione is afraid to accept, and or recruitment forms Harry hasn't signed. They clash over it. They misread silence as resentment, caution as rejection. They are learning slowly that not every disagreement is a prelude to betrayal. The war, of course, has not left them. A slammed door still sounds like a raid to Harry. The smell of burning toast can hurl Hermione back to burning safe houses, and the night the order finally collapsed. There are nights he wakes choking on a curse that never hit him, only to find her hands on his shoulders, steady and warm, saying his name until it means now instead of then. There are mornings she freezes at the sight of his wand on the bedside table, and he quietly tucks it away, making tea without magic, just so her first sound of the day is the clink of a spoon, not the crack of apparition. Their love, in this quieter world, is less about adrenaline and more about patient, everyday care. It is Harry learning that he is allowed to take a day to fly for pleasure, not reconnaissance. It is Hermione closing a book when he walks into the room because she is allowed secrets that are not tactical. In war, they shared everything out of necessity: memories, beds, rations, guilt. In peace, they have to renegotiate where Harry ends and Hermione begins. We'll examine how radical that is, to say, I love you, and also, I might not follow you into this career. To admit that Hermione wants to rebuild legal protections for Muggleborns from inside the system, while Harry is tempted to burn the system down and start over. To accept that it's okay if, for the first time, their ambitions don't perfectly overlap. Most importantly, they choose each other anyway, not because a prophecy demanded it, not because the resistance needed its leaders united, but because in a world Voldemort once owned, they are finally allowed to own their choices. Their bond was forged in fire, but it does not magically become easy in peace. It creaks, it strains, it scares them. And yet, when the nightmares fade and the arguments cool, there is always the same extraordinary fact. They are still here, together, building something more profound than victory, a life that might, at last, be something worth fighting for. The question is, in a world trying to rebuild itself from the ruins, what does that life let them become beyond each other, and what new enemies does that quiet, stubborn happiness create? Rewriting the epilogue, Children of a Different War. King's Cross is still King's Cross. Steam, shouting, the echo of last-minute goodbyes. But in this timeline, the first thing you notice is what isn't there. No dark mark hanging like a threat above the glass roof. No Aurors in black masks herding Muggle families away. Instead, there is a wide marble wall along Platform 9 3/4, carved with names that never lived to see this quieter morning. We're exploring the epilogue of a different war, where victory came late and bloody and left no one untouched. What if 19 years after Voldemort's first triumph, the platform is full of children who have only ever known him as a history lesson and a scar on their parents' voices? Harry stands with his hand on his eldest son's shoulder, Hermione's fingers threaded through his other hand, and both of them keep glancing, just once, then again, at the memorial. This isn't a story about a neat, healed happily ever after. It's a story about what love looks like when the nightmares never fully leave. Their children have grown up on tales of underground meetings, of coded Patronus messages, of Dumbledore's final gambit, and Snape's impossible turn. But they've also grown up with rules about listening, about justice, about never using the word mudblood as anything but a lesson in what hatred can do. James reads names on the wall the way other kids read chocolate frog cards, tracing the letters of Fred Weasley and Nymphadora Tonks, asking, again and again, were you there? Albus knows, in clinical detail, what a Horcrux is, because Hermione refused to let that knowledge be hoarded by a few. Rose has seen her mother flinch at fireworks on New Year's, and her father go silent when the wireless crackles with certain frequencies. They know their parents are heroes. They also know those heroes sleep with wands beneath the pillows. How do Harry and Hermione parent in a world like this? They argue in whispers behind closed doors about how much truth is too much, about whether you protect childhood by hiding the worst, or poison it by lying. Harry, who grew up in ignorance, leans toward honesty. Hermione, who grew up targeted as a Muggleborn, worries about loading small shoulders with the weight of prophecy and failure, and the years when Hogwarts was more indoctrination camp than school. Most importantly, they decide together that fear will not dictate their children's choices. So when Hogwarts letters arrive, still on the same yellowed parchment, but now bearing the signatures of a Muggleborn deputy headmistress and a headmistress who fought in the rebellion, they let their kids see them cry, not from terror, from relief that the castle has finally become something closer to what it should have been all along. On the platform, the social landscape is visible in miniature. Former Death Eaters stand beside Muggle-born parents, both groups uncomfortable, both trying. Reparations committees have turned into awkward PTA-style councils. There are Slytherin scarves around the necks of children whose grandparents sat in Azkaban, and no one quite knows what that will mean. Will Hogwarts, rebuilt from a dark arts academy into a true school again, actually hold under this fragile peace? The train whistles. Luggage is heaved. Rose rolls her eyes when Harry reminds her, again, to write, but she squeezes him fiercely before she pulls away. Albus hesitates, admitting he's afraid of being sorted into Slytherin, and Hermione kneels so their eyes are level, while Harry says, without a trace of old prejudice, that any house that survived Voldemort's lies deserves a second chance. Then, in a moment that feels almost ordinary, and therefore extraordinary, the children climb aboard. Not soldiers, not symbols, just students. The scar on Harry's forehead is not a prophecy fulfilled, but a history survived. The burn on Hermione's arm, where mudblood was once carved, is a lesson their children will read in textbooks, instead of on living skin. They stand there as the train pulls away, hands intertwined, watching this new generation vanish into the red steam. For the first time, the future rushing away from them is not a battlefield they have to storm, but a life their children will have to define without them. And as the last carriage disappears, we have to ask, in a world built on such costly hope, what quiet darkness is already beginning to gather just out of sight of that platform? Why this what if hurts? Ethics, fate, and the weight of choice. That quiet darkness on the edge of the platform is where this what if really lives. Because once we step back from the red steam and the smiling children, we have to ask, how close did canon actually come to looking like this instead? One night in Godric's Hollow, one choice in a cottage. In canon, James and Lily refuse to bargain, Voldemort marks Harry as his equal, and the prophecy ignites. In this timeline, they flinch. They choose survival over defiance, a secret pact over open sacrifice, and the Dark Lord walks away with his victory intact. Is that cowardice? Is it simply love weaponized by fear, or is it the kind of desperate human compromise most of us would make if a wand were pointed at our baby's head? We're exploring that uncomfortable middle space. This isn't a story about easy condemnation, about shaking our heads from a safe distance and saying we would have done better. It's about realizing that James and Lily's bargain doesn't end in that cottage. It echoes through every corridor Harry walks, every law Voldemort signs, every Muggle-born registration form Hermione has to sign with shaking hands. Their survival buys him a childhood under the dark mark instead of a scar and a legend. It buys him years of watching his parents bow, and yet, most importantly, he still refuses. Without the boy who lived myth, without the whispered awe on the Hogwarts Express, Harry is just a marked orphan, in a regime that owns his family, a boy who has been taught to keep his head down, but he can't. He watches a Muggle-born classmate vanish after a disciplinary hearing. He sees Snape look away when a Carrow tortures a first year. He hears Hermione's voice crack when she talks about her parents' memories being wiped and filed away as security measures, and something in him breaks toward resistance. Destiny didn't call his name, his conscience did. Hermione's arc becomes even more extraordinary. Under open persecution, every day she stays at Hogwarts is an act of defiance. Every essay she writes about magical law is a quiet weapon. Every whispered strategy with Harry in the library is treason. Her love for him is not just a private comfort, it is a political declaration that a Muggle-born girl can choose the so-called tainted boy over every pure-blood future she's told she doesn't deserve. When she stands beside him in the room of requirement turned safe house, she isn't just choosing a person, she is choosing an idea of the world where their bond is allowed to exist. And that's the point. This darker line of history doesn't replace canon, it refracts it. It lets us see that even in the original story, beneath prophecies and hallows and neat epilogues, what actually moves the world is the same thing: choice, love, resistance. This is a story about those forces under different stars, under a sky ruled by Voldemort instead of scarred by him. And as we follow Harry and Hermione toward their own final rebellion, we have to wonder, when fate goes silent, what do you decide to fight for anyway? Harry and Hermione reframed, always choosing each other. So when fate goes silent, when prophecies lie dormant, and the dark mark hangs over the Ministry instead of the sky over Hogwarts, who do Harry and Hermione actually choose? In canon, we already know the answer, even if the books never label it as romance. They choose each other, again and again, in moments that feel small until we really look. Think about the hospital wing in Prisoner of Azkaban. After the Time Turner rescue, after the Patronus and the impossible night, it's Hermione who sits with him, who explains, who anchors his spinning world back into something he can bear. Dumbledore leaves, the adults fade, and the camera, as it were, stays on them. Two kids in beds, whispering in the dark, replaying danger not as gossip, but as shared responsibility. This isn't a story about casual friendship. It's a story about a partnership already being born. Or those late-night study sessions in Order of the Phoenix, when Harry is drowning in visions and anger, and Hermione is the one who pushes him toward occlumency, toward the DA, toward action instead of despair. She doesn't flatter him, doesn't idolize him, she questions him, argues with him, stands beside him. When chaos meets logic, when courage meets brilliance, when trauma meets relentless compassion, something more profound forms than just best mates. And then the tent, the dance in Deathly Hallows, that controversial aching moment. Canon leaves it unresolved, a flicker, a possibility. Harry tries to pull Hermione out of grief. They move together in that tiny patch of light amid the war. No kiss, no confession. But the language of the scene, the way the world falls away around them, already invites us to ask, what if this connection had just a little more time, a little more pressure, a little less safety net? In a Voldemort 1 world, there is no safety net. Hermione as a hunted Muggleborn, Harry as the regime's marked trophy or weapon. Suddenly their canon traits become survival traits. Her insistence on justice, his refusal to abandon people, their mutual respect and trust aren't just compatible, they're necessary. Under sustained terror, who do you risk your life to meet in a back corridor? Who do you let see you break? Who do you finally allow yourself to love? This is where the contrast sharpens. Ron's canon insecurities, about fame, about being overshadowed, already strain his bond with both of them under normal war. Ginny's schoolgirl crush blossoms into something real, yes, but it's built inside Hogwarts, Quidditch, shared jokes. Under a long, grinding dictatorship, with no Quidditch stands, no common room warmth, those dynamics are tested in ways they were never designed to endure. Harry and Hermione, by contrast, are already practiced at carrying impossible weight together. We're exploring one lens, not the only one. Hinny, Romeone, Harmony, and every other ship exist because the canon gives us rich, overlapping bonds. Most importantly, Harry and Hermione's relationship is one of the emotional pillars of the series, whether you read it as platonic or romantic. Imagining their bond under a darker sky and a victorious Voldemort evolving into overt love isn't an attack on canon. It's a way of honoring how extraordinary that bond already is, and asking what it becomes when the whole world is built to break it. And in the next part of this What If, we'll examine exactly that, the first moment under Voldemort's reign when choosing each other stops being theoretical and becomes something worth fighting for. Lessons from a dark timeline, resistance, romance, and reality. Because when the whole world is built to break a bond, every choice to hold it tighter starts to mean something else. Under a victorious Voldemort, Harry and Hermione's love doesn't just feel tender or comforting, it becomes a quiet act of rebellion, a refusal to let the Dark Lord define what survives. We're exploring a pattern that runs far beyond this one what if. Stories of love in dark times, whether it's two teenagers whispering plans in a Hogwarts corridor patrolled by Death Eaters, or real couples hiding photographs from secret police, speak to a need we almost never outgrow. We want to believe that tenderness can outlast brutality, that even when the state controls the laws, the classrooms, the headlines, it does not fully control the human heart. Think about a Muggle-born girl whose name is on a registry and a boy marked as a weapon of the regime choosing to sit a little too close in the library. That tiny, ordinary moment becomes extraordinary, because this isn't a story about resistance as only wands raised on a battlefield. This is a story about resistance as 1,000 small decisions to care. In a Hogwarts rewritten as a dark arts academy, where Muggleborns vanish from class lists and the dark mark hangs over the ministry, the regime wants people isolated, suspicious, always afraid. Harry deciding that Hermione's safety matters more than his own survival calculations. Hermione deciding to love the boy the posters call dangerous and useful. That is resistance too, not as spectacle, but as stubborn continuity of connection. And if that feels familiar, it should. Authoritarian regimes in our world have tried to police who may marry, who may touch, who may even be seen together. They have outlawed mixed marriages, raided secret gatherings, torn up letters. Yet, again and again, people have loved quietly anyway, passing notes through fences, inventing code words, building families in the shadows. When we watch Harry and Hermione trace maps of secret passages instead of homework charts, or share a stolen kiss in a classroom warded against listening spells, we're not just watching fantasy, we're watching an echo. So why are we, as fans, so drawn to alternate timelines and unexpected ships like this? Because they let us test the edges of canon without discarding it. We can ask, if you strip away the safety nets, what does this bond become? If Harry never gets to be the boy who lived, if Hermione's brilliance paints a target on her back, do they still choose each other? Alternate universes give us permission to turn the dials, to see which qualities were decorative and which were always structural. Most importantly, imagining their love under Voldemort's rule isn't about changing who they are, it's about turning up the contrast on what was always there. Harry's instinct to stand between the vulnerable and the threat, Hermione's fierce loyalty and refusal to abandon the truth, their shared willingness to walk into danger together if it means the other one doesn't walk alone. In this darker timeline, courage becomes less abstract, loyalty becomes less comfortable, and choosing each other becomes something worth fighting for in every sense. And that raises a sharper question. When the final rebellion comes, what does it cost them to keep that choice? From page to screen to what if, playing fair with canon. To answer that cost, we have to slow down and ask a different question. How far can we bend canon before it breaks? When we say, what if Voldemort actually wins the first war, we're not throwing the books away. We're gripping a few key threads that are already there and pulling hard. The first anchor is the prophecy itself. In canon, it only activates because Voldemort chooses Harry and literally marks him as his equal. Here, he never attacks Godric's Hollow. The wording still hangs over the story, but dormant, like a loaded wand no one has fired yet. That one alteration lets James and Lily survive, lets the boy who lived become the boy who watched the Dark Mark rise over the Ministry instead. The second anchor is that Ministry takeover, Barty Crouch Jr., Lucius Malfoy's influence, Fudge's cowardice. Canon already shows us how fragile that institution is. We're just asking, what if the collapse comes 10 years earlier and harder? Hogwarts, too, has always been malleable. Under Dumbledore, it's a sanctuary. Under Umbridge, it warps almost overnight into a surveillance state. So a Voldemort-controlled headmaster, a curriculum steeped in dark arts and blood purity, Slytherin elevated and Muggleborns hunted. That's not an inversion, it's Umbridge's year turned up and stretched out over a generation. From those anchors, every major divergence grows. Voldemort sparing the Potters is not mercy, it's a twisted PR move. The Ministry-controlled prophet needs a symbol of properly cowed resistance, so James becomes the Auror who bent the knee, Lily the brilliant witch forced into research for the regime, Harry the living warning of what happens when you defy and fail. Hermione's forged identity flows straight out of the Muggle-born Registration Commission. Canon already gives us forged papers, blood status files, interrogations. Here, she survives because someone in the underground rewrites her records, turning a Muggle-born girl into a suspicious but technically protected half-blood. And Snape? Canon Snape is already the ultimate double agent. We're exploring what happens when that role is expanded over a longer, darker timeline. More years of coded messages, occlumency in both directions, and a man who has to protect not just one boy for Lily's sake, but an entire hidden network of children who might finally light the fuse Voldemort dodged. Most importantly, the characters are extrapolated, not reversed. Harry still hates oppression. The difference is that he has watched it win. Hermione still clings to knowledge and justice. The difference is that books can now get her killed. Ron is still torn between bravery and fear for his family. The difference is that his family's survival may depend on him not standing out. Their choices are sharper, crueler, but the cores we recognize remain. Yes, some elements are heightened. The romance is more central, the set pieces more cinematic, a kiss in the shadow of a dark mark over Hogwarts, a secret Patronus practice in a forbidden classroom, a midnight heist through a Death Eater-run ministry. But this isn't a story about replacing canon with spectacle. This is a story about turning up the contrast on themes Rowling already wrote: resistance, found family, the way love and connection can become something worth fighting for in the bleakest possible world. So as we move into the final rebellion, try to see this not as a rival timeline, but as a long-form thought experiment. What else can this world, these characters, this bond between Harry and Hermione do when the safety rails are gone? And when the moment finally comes to fire that dormant prophecy, who chooses to pull the trigger, and who chooses to walk into the line of fire with them? If Voldemort won, would you still fight? So when that moment comes, the prophecy humming in the background, the world already broken, there's one question we can't dodge as easily as Voldemort dodged Godric's Hollow. If you were born into this world, where the Dark Mark is just part of the sky, and the Ministry has always flown Voldemort's banner, would you even know you were supposed to rebel? Or would you, like so many witches and wizards in canon, learn the rules, keep your head down, and call survival wisdom instead of surrender? We're exploring a timeline where Harry isn't the boy who lived. He's the boy who watched classmates disappear after blood audits, where Hogwarts has portraits that report to Death Eaters, and Defense Against the Dark Arts is a polite name for obedience training. Hermione doesn't arrive to a magical wonderland. She walks into a dark arts academy with a Muggle-born registry on the wall. In that world, what if the brave thing isn't shouting in the Great Hall, but quietly refusing to sign your name? So who are you in this story? Do you feel closest to Harry, the reluctant symbol who never asked for a prophecy but finally chooses to light the fuse anyway? Or Hermione, the targeted intellectual who keeps reading banned books, keeps asking dangerous questions, keeps believing that knowledge and love together can still change something? Maybe you recognize yourself in Ron, the fearful loyalist, whose courage comes in stuttering bursts, late, imperfect, but real when it finally arrives, and then it gets more uncomfortable. Are you James, who made compromises to keep his family safe until the line moved too far? Or Snape, trapped in a web of oaths and regrets, trying to thread a needle between self-preservation and atonement? This isn't a story about easy heroes and cartoon villains. It's a story about people who wake up every day under the dark mark and still have to decide, in small, ordinary moments, who they are. Because most of us are not fighting literal Dark Lords. We're facing lies that spread faster than owls, policies that quietly dehumanize, jokes that punch down until they stop sounding like jokes. What does resistance look like there? Is it correcting a friend who repeats a slur, questioning the headline that feels a little too convenient, refusing to laugh when cruelty is framed as just a laugh? These aren't duels in the Forbidden Forest, but they are lines in the sand. And then there's love. In a regime that punishes attachment, would you risk your job, your wand, your freedom for the person whose hand you shouldn't be holding? If loving them paints a target on both your backs, do you hide that bond, or do you let it redefine what worth it means? Most importantly, what does your answer reveal about the kind of person you want to be, not just in fiction, but here, now? Because in the end, this dark AU isn't escapism, it's rehearsal. Stories like this stretch our moral imagination. They let us practice choosing in safety, so that, if the world ever tilts this far into shadow, we've already asked ourselves the hardest question. If Voldemort won, would you still fight? And if your answer is yes, even trembling, even conditional, then the next question is simple and far more dangerous. What does that yes look like in your life before the dark mark ever touches the sky? Recap: the world that might have been. So let's pull back, just for a moment, and look at the world we've actually walked through together. This is the timeline where Voldemort does not fall in Godric's Hollow, where the killing curse never rebounds, the prophecy never quite activates, and instead of a baby savior, the wizarding world gets a Dark Lord in full command. James and Lily live, but only because they accept a terrible bargain. Harry raised as a monitored asset, the Potter's leash to Voldemort's regime, instead of martyred by it. Hogwarts bends first. Under a puppet headmaster and Caro-style deputies, defense becomes dark arts, Muggle studies becomes propaganda, and the castle we know as home turns into an academy of fear. Muggle-borns like Hermione are catalogued and culled. Pureblood politics are rewritten around obedience, not tradition. The Great Hall still fills with candles and feasts. It just does so beneath a sky ruled by the Dark Mark. Into that world step Harry and Hermione, not as instant best friends, but as wary allies, the marked boy who is always watched, and the Muggle-born girl who should have been erased. Their connection begins in whispered study sessions and shared glances across segregated tables. It deepens every time they choose each other over safety, passing notes about banned texts, sabotaging examinations that are actually loyalty tests, standing shoulder to shoulder when Slytherin enforcers circle, and then comes the Patronus. In a frozen courtyard, Dementors unleashed as discipline, Harry reaches for anything bright and finds Hermione's hand instead. His stag bursts from that contact, from that love he doesn't yet dare to name, driving back not just the creatures, but the narrative that Voldemort owns his soul. That moment is our hinge. After that, they are not just surviving together, they are planning together. From there, the escalations stack. The Twisted Tournament, repurposed by Voldemort as a spectacle of dominance, becomes their stage. Dumbledore and Snape, diminished but not destroyed, offer mentorship in the shadows, Snape drilling occlumency until Harry can lie to the Dark Lord's face, Dumbledore guiding Hermione through the ethics of resistance. Ron's crisis of loyalty fractures the trio, his jealousy and fear pushing him toward collaboration before he claws his way back to them by destroying the Horcrux locket that feeds on his worst thoughts. Because yes, the Horcruxes still exist. The revelation that Voldemort split his soul turns their private rebellion into a second war. What if the prophecy never named Harry, but he and Hermione choose the role anyway? This isn't a story about destiny dragging them. This is a story about two teenagers deciding that love, in this world, must mean active defiance. Most importantly, that love is not an escape hatch. It is the engine of the final uprising, the reason they turned Voldemort's grand arena, his ultimate tournament, his public coronation, into the site of his undoing. Their bond lets them coordinate wandless signals, trust each other's timing, and hold the line when the new order erupts from the crowd. And yet, even after all of that, we're exploring only one answer to one question. What if Voldemort won the first war, and Harry and Hermione still found each other, still chose to fight? This world is bleak, but their connection insists on something more profound, that in almost any configuration of events, these two remain drawn together, remain dangerous precisely because they love. So as we move into our closing, remember, this was one possible path along an infinite map. There are other what-ifs waiting, other loves, other betrayals, other quiet acts of courage we'll examine. The question is, which road through this extraordinary universe do we walk next, together? Your turn. Rewrite the war. Rewrite the love story. So as we move into our closing, remember, this was one possible path along an infinite map. There are other what-ifs waiting, other loves, other betrayals, other quiet acts of courage we'll examine. The question is, which road through this extraordinary universe do we walk next together? What if you took the map from our hands now and drew your own branch? What if Ron had made a different choice in that moment by the fire, kept his temper, stayed through the worst of the underground, refused to let jealousy or fear push him away from their bond? Does he become Harry's second-in-command in the Resistance, or Hermione's fiercest defender when the regime turns its eyes on Muggleborns? In your version, does he die for them, or live long enough to forgive himself? Or maybe your heart is tugged somewhere else. What if Ginny Weasley wasn't just a name whispered in coded messages, but a central architect of the rebellion, running safe houses, smuggling wands, quietly rewriting the war from the shadows? What if Neville Longbottom was the one who turned Hogwarts, this dark academy under Voldemort's rule, into a living battlefield of small sabotages and secret oaths? We're exploring one configuration of courage here. You can sketch another. And then there is the love story. What if Voldemort had discovered Harry and Hermione's connection earlier, seen the way his marked orphan and the Muggleborn girl always found their way back to each other? Does he try to break them with legitimacy, with bargains, with threats against their families? Or does he underestimate it, dismiss it as teenage weakness until it becomes something more profound, something worth fighting for in its own right? In the comments, outline your favorite moment from this timeline. Was it a specific Horcrux mission you wish we had lingered on? The night raid on the Ministry? The cursed vault beneath Hogwarts? The stolen kiss in a safe house before everything almost fell apart? Or do you want to write a tiny ficlet of post-war domestic life? Harry burning breakfast, while Hermione reads case law, their scars and their laughter sharing the same quiet kitchen light. Tell us which moment hit you hardest, and why. Was it the Patronus by the lake, blazing against a darker sky? Dumbledore's last stand in a castle that no longer felt like home? Snape's final betrayal of Voldemort, when his double life finally actually means freedom? Or the quiet epilogue at King's Cross, when two exhausted survivors choose life and choose each other one more time? If this reimagined war and this re-centered love moved you, help keep this kind of long-form storytelling alive. Like the video, subscribe if you want more canon-twisting what-ifs and slow-burn, war-forged romances, and share it with the friend who still argues about ships at 3 in the morning. Because in any world, canon or alternate, light or dark, this isn't a story about prophecy or power. This is a story about two people choosing each other and choosing what's right, even when it costs them everything. If that resonates with you, keep choosing stories that challenge you, that move you, that remind you love and courage are always intertwined. We'll be here on the next road, waiting to walk it with you.